My grandson. Set up my new phone, then every code. From my bank went to him. The number I want you to hold in your head as I start this story is 1985. My Constance and I set up our checking and savings accounts at Prairie Credit Union on the 3rd of March of 1985. And Constance sat with me at our kitchen table that same Sunday afternoon and made me start a hand-kept paper ledger of every single transaction on the savings account in a small brown cloth-bound ledger book she had picked out at the stationery store on Elm Street. And she made me promise I would enter every deposit, every withdrawal, every interest credit, every service charge, every check that cleared, and every transfer we ever made or received on that account, in the ledger, in ink, on the 3rd of every following month, without exception, for the rest of my life. That was my promise to my Connie. And on the 3rd of every month from March of 1985 to today, which is 39 years and change, I have sat at that same kitchen table on the 3rd of the month with the paper monthly statement Prairie Credit Union had sent me in the mail, and I have reconciled the statement against the ledger, one line at a time, in ink, in my own careful hand. Every month for 39 years. Connie set up the ledger. Connie made me promise. Connie died on a Tuesday morning in July of 8 years back, at the end of a very fast pancreatic cancer that gave us 97 days between the diagnosis and the burial. And in the 8 years since Connie died, I have kept the promise, on the 3rd of the month, in ink, without exception, in a cloth-bound ledger my wife picked out in 1985 that has by now become 3 cloth-bound ledgers because 2 of them have filled up, and the 3rd is on page 179. The reason I am telling you about the ledger first is that on the 3rd of September of last year, a Tuesday afternoon at about 3:40 in my kitchen, I was doing the August reconciliation, and I was midway through the second column of the printed statement when my old ink pen stopped moving. I looked at the line I had stopped on. It was a transfer, dated August the 7th, in the amount of $2,800 to a receiving account described in the credit union's shorthand as TCP Holdings, External Wire. I sat at my kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon at 3:40 p.m. in the light coming through the window over the sink my Connie had loved, and I read the line 4 times. I did not know what TCP Holdings was. I had not made a transfer of $2,800 on August the 7th, or on any other day of August, or on any day of my life, to any TCP Holdings anywhere. My hand had not moved that money. I stood up. I picked up the phone in the little side table. I called Prairie Credit Union at 3:42 p.m., and when the young woman at the switchboard answered, I said, "Emily, please. It's Leonard Ainsworth. Is Warren Ellis in the branch this afternoon? There is something on my August statement I do not recognize, and I need to see him today." Warren Ellis has been my personal banker at Prairie Credit Union for 22 years. My Connie had chosen Warren for us in the winter of 2003 when our previous banker, Mrs. Halloway, retired. Connie had interviewed 3 of the younger bankers at the branch personally over the course of a week, in the way Connie interviewed everybody she was going to trust with a piece of our life. And Connie had picked Warren because, she said at the kitchen table that night, "Leo, that young man listens the way somebody who is going to be a good banker for us for the next 30 years listens. He waits until he understands the whole question before he answers. That is the whole trade. Warren has been our banker every one of the 22 years since." Emily at the switchboard said, "Mr. Ainsworth, he is in his office. I am going to put you through. He is going to want to see you. Hold on." She put me through. Warren picked up on the second ring. He said, "Leo, what have you got? Tell me plain." I said, "Warren, my ledger is off by $2,800 against the August statement. There is a line for a transfer on August the 7th to something the statement calls TCP Holdings, External Wire. I did not make that transfer. I have never heard of TCP Holdings. I am not sure yet what else is on the statement. I stopped reconciling the moment I saw it. I want you to pull the full statement history since the beginning of the year on my account, and I want you to have it ready when I get there. I am going to be at the branch in 20 minutes. Warren was quiet on the other end of the phone for maybe 2 seconds. Then he said, in the voice I have heard Warren use exactly once before over 22 years, which is the voice he had used when he called me at the hospice to tell me that Connie's automatic annuity direct deposit was going to be rerouted to my sole account, effective the day after her death, per the paperwork Connie had signed in April. A voice that is very careful and very steady and very quiet. Warren said, "Leo, come down. Come now. I am going to have Emily print you the full ledger going back to January the 1st, and I am going to have Marta from operations sit in with us so we have 4 eyes on it. And I am going to look at whether TCP Holdings is a name I recognize from anywhere else. Do not stop at the deli on the way. Come straight here." I said, "Warren, I am on my way." I hung up. I picked up my jacket. I picked up my ledger. I want to say that I picked up the ledger because it is the piece that mattered. And I picked up my keys. I put the ledger under my arm. I stood at my kitchen table for a moment, and I put my hand on the back of Connie's chair, which she had sat in for the last 48 years we had been married, and which no one has sat in since the Wednesday morning in July, 8 years back, when the hospice orderlies wheeled her out. And I said out loud, "Connie, something is wrong on the ledger. TCP Holdings, 2800, August the 7th. I do not know what it is. I am going to see Warren. I will tell you what I find out at supper." And I felt her, the way I have felt her for 8 years, at the specific right shoulder from behind, in the middle of that specific kitchen, and I heard her say what she used to say to me at the kitchen table every time I was about to walk out of the house on something hard. Connie used to say, "Leo, paper remembers. Trust the paper. Walk out on the paper. Come back to the paper." I walked out of the house at 4 minus a quarter, and I drove to the credit union with the ledger under my arm on the passenger seat. I sat down across from Warren Ellis at 4:14 p.m. Warren had a folder on his desk. Marta from operations sat to Warren's left. Warren had a mug of coffee in front of me before I got my jacket off. He said, "Leo, first, I have pulled every transaction on your savings and your checking going back to January the 1st. I want to walk through it with you. Second, I have called our fraud team in the main office in the city, and there is a woman named Alma Reyes in that team who is on standby for us, and I will call her if I need to. Third, before we start, I want to ask you one question. Have you, at any point since Christmas of last year, given anybody at all, including any of your children or your grandchildren, access to your phone, even for a minute, even to help you fix a setting, even for a favor?" I sat across from Warren Ellis at his desk on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:16 p.m., and I looked at the man my Connie had picked out for us in 2003, and I understood, in the specific instant it took me to understand it, that Warren already knew something I did not know yet, and that his one question was a very careful question with a very specific answer he was checking for. And I answered. I said, "Warren, yes. My grandson Wesley set up my new phone at my house on Christmas afternoon last year. He sat at my kitchen table with the phone for about 3 hours after Christmas dinner, while everybody else was in the living room. He said he wanted to make sure the setup was easy for me, since I do not use these things much. He is my daughter Susan's oldest boy. He is 28. Wesley Whitcomb, why are you asking, Warren?" Warren looked at Marta. Marta nodded. Warren looked back at me. He said, in the same careful, steady voice, "Leo, Marta and I pulled a report from your carrier about half an hour before you got here, using the standing authorization Connie set up in 2004 on your accounts. Your phone has had an SMS forwarding rule active on it since Christmas afternoon of last year, forwarding every incoming text message to a number that is not yours, and dismissing the notifications from your phone so you would not see them. The forwarding number is a mobile number registered to a Wesley P. Whitcomb of this town, and the reason I asked whether you had given anybody access is that I already knew the answer, and I wanted you to say the answer in your own words before I told you what else is in this folder. Because what else is in this folder, Leo? I want you to breathe before I say it. What else is in this folder is a set of 12 transfers dated between January the 10th and August the 22nd from your savings account to receiving accounts associated with an entity called TCP Holdings and a related shell called Titan Capital Partners that total $85,600 and that were every one of them confirmed by a 2-factor authentication code texted to your registered phone number and, we have to assume, received on Wesley's phone via the forwarding rule. Every transfer, 12 of them, since January. I sat at Warren Ellis's desk on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:18 p.m., and I looked at the ledger under my hand, the ledger my Connie had picked out in 1985, on the assumption that at some point in our lives, paper would remember what the electrons forgot. And I looked at Warren, and I said, quiet, Warren, that means the discrepancy on my August reconciliation is not one transfer. It is the 12th transfer, and I missed the other 11 for 8 months. How did I miss them, Warren? I do the ledger every month, on the 3rd, in ink. How did I miss them? Warren said, Leo, you did not miss them. You saw every one of them on the statements. Marta and I checked. Each one appeared in the correct column, on the correct date, with the correct amount. But every one of them was posted under the shorthand descriptions the credit union uses for external wires. Things like TCP Holdings X'd, TCP Trust X'd, TCP X'd wire. And every one of them was a round number that could plausibly look like a legitimate transfer if you were not looking for a specific fraud pattern. Whoever set this up understood how our transaction descriptions read on a printed statement. Whoever set this up knew that you were an old bookbinder who was going to reconcile in ink and was going to look at the numbers and, if the numbers matched a plausible shape, was going to trust the paper. And whoever set this up got you to trust the paper for 8 months, until August. Because in August, the 12th transfer landed on a Wednesday in a month where you had not made any other transfers for 4 weeks. And the isolated shape of it made it stick out to you on your reconciliation, which is exactly what you have told me on the phone at 3:42 p.m. That is why you caught it now. That is why you did not catch it earlier. It is not a failure of the ledger, Leo. The ledger is what caught it. It caught the 12th. And that means we still stopped the 13th, which, Marta and I checked, and I want you to hear this, is not yet in flight but has been scheduled for the coming Friday morning in the amount of $11,200. And I am going to hold it dead on this desk before you and I leave this office today. That transfer does not happen. But the 11,200 that would have gone Friday is not the piece I need you to focus on right now. The 85,006 is. Warren paused. He looked at Marta. He looked at me. He said, Leo, there is one more thing I have to tell you. And I want you to sit with it, because it is going to sound like a coincidence, and it is not a coincidence. The name TCP Holdings and the parent name Titan Capital Partners are, as of this past Thursday, both under federal investigation as suspected components of a Ponzi scheme that the FBI and the city has been building a case on for the last 18 months. And that collapsed publicly a week and a half ago on the 25th of August, and that is now in the wind-down phase. Every dollar that went out of your savings to those receiving accounts in 2024 went into a Ponzi scheme that is now the subject of a federal wire fraud case in the Eastern District. Which means, Leo, I want you to hear this from me before you hear it from anyone else. The transfers were not going to some anonymous stranger. They were going to a scheme. And whoever set up the forwarding rule on your phone and whoever executed the 12 transfers was, most likely, trying to move your money into what they believed was a legitimate investment and were themselves, on some level, victims of the scheme as well. That is not an excuse, and I am not making one. I am telling you the shape of what we are inside of, because your grandson Wesley is going to be, one way or another, in the next 2 weeks, either a witness to a federal case or a defendant in one. And the choice you make in the next 72 hours is going to be a piece of which one he is going to be. I do not have a recommendation for you, Leo, but there is a special agent named Diane Roberts at the FBI's Economic Crimes Unit in the city, who I am going to call from this desk in about 10 minutes, if you tell me to. And there is your lawyer, Judith Kowalski, who Connie's cousin, I remember. I am going to call her too. And there is your daughter, Susan, who I am not going to call because she is your daughter, and it is not my call to make. All right, Leo? I sat at Warren Ellis's desk on a Tuesday afternoon at 4:21 p.m. with a paper ledger under my hand that my Connie had bought at the stationery store on Elm Street on the 3rd of March of 1985. And I looked at Warren, and I said, because I had, at some point in the 4 minutes since Warren had said the word Wesley, understood that the whole shape of the rest of my life was going to be measured by what I said next. I said, Warren, call Judith, call Diane Roberts. Do not call Susan yet. I am going to call Susan tonight from my kitchen, myself, because she deserves to hear it from her father and not from her father's banker. And I want you to know one thing, before we do any of the rest of this. My grandson is not going to be a defendant in a federal case. He is going to be a witness. I do not know yet how I know that, but I know it. He is going to be a witness, and he is going to cooperate. and he is going to pay every dollar back, and we are going to walk out the other side of the federal case with a grandson who has done the hardest work of his life. That is the piece I am going to hold in my head from this desk. Now, call them. And Warren, thank you for what you have done today. Connie picked well. She said so in 2003. She was right. Warren picked up the phone. He called Judith Kowalski first. He called Special Agent Roberts second. He held the pending Friday transfer dead on his desk in front of me. And by the time I stood up from Warren's chair at 5:41 p.m., 3 appointments had been booked for me over the following 4 days. Judith at 9 the next morning, Agent Roberts at 2 the same afternoon, and a full sit-down at my house on Sunday evening with Susan, her husband Paul, my grandson Wesley, my lawyer Judith Kowalski, and Special Agent Diane Roberts on speakerphone from her field office in the city. And I had understood, driving home from the credit union on a Tuesday afternoon in September, through my own small town, with the maples starting to turn, that a boy I had helped raise through 8 summers of school holiday visits, a boy whose Christmases in this house had been the specific happiest days of my Connie's last decade of life, a boy whose grandmother had died in his arms on a Tuesday morning 8 years earlier in a room off my kitchen with her ledger open on her nightstand and her hand in his, had, over 8 months, quietly moved $85,600 of my savings into a Ponzi scheme he had been recruited into by a college roommate, and had done it via a set of settings on a phone he had spent one Christmas afternoon last year setting up at my kitchen table. So it's easier for you, Grandpa. And on the drive home, I did not, as many grandfathers might have, cry. And I did not, as many grandfathers might have, rage. I sat behind the wheel of my old sedan on a Tuesday evening in September on the road between the credit union and my house, and I did what a bookbinder does when a book comes back to his bench in bad shape with the block coming loose from the boards. I looked at the shape of the damage. I looked at the shape of the binding. I decided which stitches could hold. I decided which threads I would have to cut. And I got ready to do the very careful work of taking the book apart, one signature at a time, so that I could put it back together the way it should have been put together in the first place, and so that the spine, when I was finished, would hold. Before I tell you what happened on that Sunday evening, and what my grandson said to me at my kitchen table in the presence of an FBI agent on speakerphone and a lawyer in the chair his grandmother had died in, let me ask you one thing. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from tonight and how old you are, because I have a feeling some of you have a grandchild in your life who has been drifting the last year or two, and I have a feeling some of you have felt, in the specific way an old craftsman feels, the wobble of a chair whose glue is failing, that something in that drift is more than just a young person finding his way. If any of what I am telling you tonight sounds like your kitchen, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me to the end. Because this is a story about a paper ledger my wife made me start in 1985, and a checkbox on a phone my grandson set up on Christmas afternoon, and an $85,600 hole in my savings that turned out to be, when I traced it back to its source, one small piece of a federal Ponzi case with a courtroom docket that ran 10 weeks in a courthouse in the city. Stay till the end. The end is where I sat in the 4th row of a federal courtroom on a Wednesday morning in April, and my grandson took the witness stand in a suit his mother had bought him and testified for 6.5 hours under oath about what he had done. And I understood, watching him from the 4th row, that the young man being sworn in that morning was going to spend the next 15 years becoming the grandson his grandmother had already known he was going to become on the Christmas morning in 1996 when he was born and she held him for the first time. Let me tell you what kind of story this is before we go any further, because this one is different from most of the ones I have heard from other old people about a grandchild who took something they should not have taken, and I want to say it plain. This is not a story about how a grandfather cut his grandson off. It is not a story about how a grandfather sent a grandson to prison. It is not a story about how a family cast out its youngest man. It is a story about how a grandfather looked at a grandson who had done a terrible thing under the influence of a smoother older man who had done a much worse thing, and understood that the terrible thing the grandson had done was, from a specific angle, a piece of the worst thing being done to him, and decided, with the help of a very good lawyer and a very careful FBI agent and a very stubborn daughter and a paper ledger that had been kept in ink since 1985, to make his grandson the kind of witness whose testimony sends the older man to a federal prison for the next 12 years. and whose cooperation returns 41 cents on the dollar of the grandfather's own money through the federal clawback fund, and whose next 15 years of paychecks go, in small automatic increments every 2 weeks, into repaying the remaining 59 cents on the dollar, and who comes to his grandfather's house every second Sunday of the month for a supper and a 2-hour conversation about what he has done and what he is becoming. That is what I did. I want you to hear the shape of that choice before you hear the rest of the story, because I know some of you are going to hear it and think it was too soft, and I know some of you are going to hear it and think it was too hard. And I have spent the 18 months since the Tuesday afternoon at Warren's desk making peace with both of those responses, because I have decided that on the book I was rebinding. The book of my grandson's life. The book my daughter had brought into the world 28 years ago and had begun to lose track of 6 years earlier through no fault of her own. The stitch I chose was the stitch that would let the whole binding over the next 20 years hold, not the tightest possible stitch. The stitch that would let the book open and close as many times as it needed to over the rest of the young man's life without the spine cracking. That is the bookbinder's discipline. And it turned out to be the grandfather's discipline too. And I want you to understand that the whole shape of the story you are about to hear is the shape of that specific choice. And I want to say this too. This is not a revenge story. Nobody at Warren's desk that Tuesday afternoon wanted revenge. Not Warren, and not Marta, and not Judith Kowalski when she came on the line, and not Special Agent Roberts when Warren called her, and not my daughter Susan when I called her at 8:30 that night from my kitchen, and not my son-in-law Paul when Susan handed him the phone, and this is the piece that surprised me the most, not my grandson Wesley when he came to my house on that Sunday evening at 6, saw who was there, saw the ledger open on my kitchen table, saw the folder open next to the ledger, and did the thing that determined everything that came after, which was that he did not try to run. He walked in, took off his jacket, hung it on the hook by the door where he has hung his jacket since he was 5 years old, sat down in the chair to my right, put his hands flat on the table so we could all see them, and said, before Judith or Agent Roberts or I had said a word, "Grandpa, I did it. I did all of it. I have been carrying it for 8 months. I want to tell you everything now, and I want to tell them everything now, and I want to do whatever I have to do to make it right." That is how the Sunday evening began. There was not a moment of it that was about revenge. There was every moment of it that was about repair. It is a repair story. It is my Connie's repair story, more than mine, because Connie is the one who bought the ledger in 1985 and made me promise to keep it, and picked Warren in 2003 and told me at the kitchen table on the 94th day of her 97-day illness that, "Leo, the family is going to have a hard year at some point after I go. I want you to promise me you will hold it together. I want you to promise me that whatever happens, when it happens, you do not throw anybody out. You bring them closer. You fix the binding. Promise me." I promised Connie. I promised her on the 94th day of her dying. On the 3rd day of September, 8 years and change later, I kept the promise. And this is the story of how it worked out. Constance Ainsworth died on the 16th of July of 2016 at 7:41 in the morning in a hospice bed. We had moved into the small room off my kitchen, the room she had used for 37 years as her sewing room, and had made me clear out 4 weeks earlier when she said she did not have the strength to climb our stairs to our bedroom anymore. Connie had received the pancreatic cancer diagnosis on the 12th of April of that same year, 97 days from diagnosis to burial. Connie did not have 3 years to prepare, the way some wives do. Connie had 97 days, which is a piece of what shaped this whole story, because everything Connie had set up for me, the ledger from 1985, and Warren from 2003, and Judith Kowalski from 1991, and the small, careful pieces of infrastructure my wife had built our life on over the 48 years we were married, had been set up decades before Connie ever knew she was going to die on a Tuesday morning at 7:41 a.m. in July of 2016. Connie did not build the fortress on her deathbed. Connie built it in her 30s and her 40s and her 50s on the strength of a general suspicion she had about the shape of the world. And the fortress was already there when the cancer came, and she did not have to add much to it because the fortress was already what it needed to be. I want you to hold that in your head, because there is a piece of the story of my grandson that is going to come clear only if you understand that my Connie had already, in 1985, done the specific thing that would eventually save what was left of our savings on the 3rd of September of last year, 39 years and change later, without knowing anything about the specific mechanism that would come to threaten it. Connie died at 7:41 a.m. on the 16th of July. My daughter Susan, who is a nurse and had been at Connie's bedside every night of the last 3 weeks after her shifts, was on Connie's left side. My son-in-law Paul was standing at the doorway of the sewing room. My grandson Wesley, who was 20 years old that summer, home from his junior year of college, was sitting on the floor at the foot of Connie's bed with his back against the wall, holding his grandmother's foot through the blanket the way she had told him to on the second day of the last 3 weeks when the pain had gotten to the point that she could not stand her extremities to be touched by anybody but a specific person she trusted. My granddaughter Nell, who was 14 years old that summer, and who had been at her grandmother's bedside every afternoon after coming home from her summer job at the town library, was in the kitchen making coffee because Connie had said on the 15th of July at about 10 p.m., "Nell, honey, tomorrow morning when it happens, I want you to be the one making coffee, not sitting with me, making coffee for your grandpa. Your grandpa is going to need a cup of coffee when it is over, and I want the person he loves most among the young ones to be the one making it. That is your job, okay?" Nell had promised. Nell was making coffee at 7:41 a.m. on the 16th of July when her grandmother died. Nell was 14 years old. Nell brought me a cup of coffee at 7:48 a.m. in the sewing room with her hands shaking, and she did not spill a drop. That is my Nell. That is my granddaughter, who is now 22 years old and in her first year of a graduate program in library science and rare book conservation, and who is, I want you to have this in your head as I tell the rest of the story, the second grandchild in this family, and the piece of the family that has held true across everything that has happened over the last 18 months. I sat in the sewing room for about 40 minutes after Connie was gone. Paul went to make phone calls. Susan sat on the bed beside her mother. Wesley stayed on the floor with his hand on Connie's foot. Nell stood in the doorway with a second cup of coffee. And I understood, at some point in those 40 minutes, that Connie's ledger was still on her nightstand. The little brown cloth-bound ledger she had bought in 1985, that had by then filled up and been replaced twice, so the one on her nightstand was actually the third one, the one that would still be on my kitchen table on the 3rd of September of last year. And that the last entry Connie had made in that ledger, in her own hand and ink, was the reconciliation of the June statement, 6 weeks earlier, before she had gotten too sick to hold a pen steady. Connie had, in June of 2016, done the last ledger entry she was going to do in her life, and had not known it was the last. She had, that evening in June, closed the ledger and put it back on her nightstand, and had not looked at it again. And I had, in the weeks after Connie's diagnosis, made a specific promise to her that I would keep the ledger. It was one of the last promises I made her. I made it at her hospice bed. I have kept it, every 3rd of the month for 8 years. And the promise I made at her bedside? A promise about a small brown cloth-bound book she had bought in 1985, turned out, on the 3rd of September of last year, to be the specific promise that saved what was left of our savings from a Ponzi scheme in a courtroom in the city, and that stood a grandson up on a witness stand in the Eastern District Federal Court on a Wednesday morning in April, and that put a smoother older man in a federal prison for the next 12 years. Connie's promise, her ledger, a small brown cloth-bound book from a stationery store on Elm Street. That is what a piece of infrastructure set up in 1985 was doing on the 3rd of September of last year, at a Tuesday afternoon reconciliation in a kitchen on a small side street of a small town. That is what love scaled at the level of a promise looks like across 4 decades. Let me tell you about the trade, because it is the trade that shaped the ear I heard the credit union with on that Tuesday afternoon in September. I have been a bookbinder for 55 years. I started as an apprentice at 19 years old to a man named Franz Deutsch, who had been a bookbinder in the city for 41 years. By the time I walked into his workshop on the 2nd floor of a small brick building on the corner of 3rd and Chestnut, and asked whether he would take me on, Franz had come to this country in 1949 from Frankfurt, where his father had been a bookbinder and his father's father had been a bookbinder, and where the family workshop had been destroyed in the last months of the war, and Franz's father had died in the workshop, and Franz had been 15 years old, and had come to America with a small leather roll of bookbinding tools that had been his grandfather's, and had spent the next 34 years being the bookbinder Frankfurt had lost. Franz took me on because I had asked, and because I had shown up on the second morning after being told to come back, and because, Franz told me later, when I had been with him for about 11 years, because when he had asked me what I wanted to be a bookbinder for, I had answered, because I want to know how to take a book that has been broken and put it back together so that when the person who owns it opens it again, it does not remember the being broken. Franz had said, "That is the wrong answer, but it is the wrong answer for the right reason. Come tomorrow at 7. Franz was my master for 6 years. When Franz died in 1975 of a stroke in his own workshop with an unfinished spine repair on the bench in front of him, I closed the workshop for 2 weeks. And then I reopened it in the same location, with Franz's name still on the door for the next 40 years. I never took it down. It is still on the door, though the workshop itself has been closed since my Connie's illness. And I took over Franz's book of customers, and I have been the bookbinder for most of those customers ever since, 55 years. I have restored library editions from the 1820s, family Bibles from the 1790s, prayer books that came over on ships from Poland, ledgers from small businesses that had been kept in the same book for 100 years, 3 specific first editions of Whitman that were separately owned by 3 separate collectors in this town, and that I have restored twice each over the course of my career, 1 wedding album from a couple in the neighborhood whose grandchildren are now bringing it in for its 3rd restoration, and every single one of my Connie's cookbooks, 5 times each, because Connie was hard on her cookbooks, and she kept coming back to me with them for a fresh spine. That is the shape of the trade. Bookbinding does one specific thing, and everything else in the trade is a version of it. The bookbinder holds the block. The block is what we call the sewn pages of a book, the guts of it, the paper part, the piece the reader is actually going to read. The block has to be held in a specific way by the boards, the front cover and the back cover, and connected to the boards by a specific set of stitches and glues and cloth strips called moles, so that when the book is opened, the block hangs from the boards in the exact right way for the reader's hand, and when the book is closed, the block sits between the boards in the exact right way for a shelf, and when the book is dropped, the block does not detach from the boards. And when the book is read 1,000 times over the course of 100 years, the block stays attached to the boards despite the 1,000 openings and closings. That is the trade. Hold the block, attach it to the boards, design the connection so it survives use. Sew the signatures. A signature is a folded set of 4 or 8 or 16 pages that make up one section of the block, with kettle stitches at the head and the tail, so the sewing does not come loose from the top or the bottom. Sew the signatures to cords or tapes running crosswise so the whole block is held together by a lattice of threads. Attach the boards to the block through the cords or tapes and reinforce with mull and glue. Cover with cloth or leather. Title the spine. Trim the edges. Set the finished book on the shelf. And when it comes back to your bench in 70 years, because the block is detaching from the boards, take it apart. Look at where the sewing failed. Look at where the mull dried out. Look at where the glue turned brittle. Rebuild the connections that need rebuilding. Preserve the connections that are still holding. Reassemble. Return the book to the shelf. Move to the next one. I have been doing that for 55 years. I have taught it to 2 apprentices, a man named Curtis, who is now 61 years old and runs his own small workshop 2 states east of here, and a woman named Rachel, who is 53 and works for a specialty conservation house in the city, and who was Franz's granddaughter, and who, for the sake of the story, Franz had asked me in 1974, a year before his death, to take on when she was ready to learn. I took her on when she was 17 in 1988, and she was with me for 11 years, and she is Franz's grandchild, and I have thought of her as a piece of him ever since. And I have been teaching Nell, my granddaughter, my Connie's namesake and temperament, the beginnings of the trade, first at 7 years old and 8 years old, at my bench in the basement here in the house on Sundays after her grandmother's supper, and now at 22 in a specific serious way as she has entered her graduate program in library science and rare book conservation. Nell is going to be a bookbinder. She is going to be, If the pieces of her life come together the way they seem to be coming together, one of a small number of serious rare book conservators working in the country by the time she is 35. Nell is Franz's ear on my bench. Nell is the piece of the trade my Connie put into the family before Connie even knew what she had put in. And Nell is the piece of the family that this whole story is going to run parallel to. Because Nell is the shadow innocent of what her brother Wesley did. A book is a body. That is the phrase Franz taught me on my second day of apprenticeship. He said, "Leo, look at this book on the bench in front of you. It has a spine. That is the backbone. It has boards. Those are the shoulders. It has end papers. Those are the skin at the shoulders. It has signatures. Those are the ribs. It has stitches. Those are the ligaments. It has glue. That is the tissue. It has a cover. That is the clothing. And it has words. Those are the soul." When a body comes to a doctor with a broken back, the doctor does not throw the body out. The doctor sets the bones. The bookbinder is a doctor. The book is a body. Treat the book like a body. If you treat the book like a body, the trade will teach you everything you need to know about the trade, and about the other trades too. "Do you understand me, Leo?" I had said. "Yes, master." He had said, "Good. Then start by sanding this board. Sand it for 2 hours. When it is smooth, come tell me. I will look at it. If it is not smooth enough, you will sand it for another 2 hours. Then I will look at it again." I sanded the board for 2 hours. It was not smooth enough. I sanded it for another 2 hours. Then I sanded it for another 2 hours after that. That was my first day of the trade. It took me a year to sand a board the way Franz would accept it on the first pass. I have been able to do it in about 6 minutes ever since. That is the shape of what a trade does to a young person. It teaches them over years the specific hand movements of a specific kind of care. And what the trade taught me about people over 55 years was that a person is a book, and that when a person's binding starts to give, when the stitches loosen and the mull dries out and the block starts to slip from the boards, the choice a bookbinder makes is not whether to save the book. The choice is how to save it, what to keep, what to replace, what to rework, and what to build back stronger than it was originally built. That is the choice I made on the drive home from Warren's desk on the 3rd of September of last year. I was going to save my grandson. The book was on my bench. I was going to figure out how. I met my Connie in the summer of 1966 at Franz's workshop. Connie was 22 years old and had come to the workshop to have her grandmother's family Bible recovered. She had walked up the stairs to the 2nd floor of the brick building on the corner of 3rd and Chestnut, and had opened the door and had put the Bible on Franz's bench. And Franz had been at lunch, and I had been the only person in the workshop, and I had been 18 months into my apprenticeship, and had been trained enough to talk to a customer about a recover job, but not enough to actually take one on. I had listened to Connie explain the Bible. I had looked at Connie. I had, in the 3 minutes it took her to explain the shape of the job, understood that I was going to marry her if she would have me, which is a specific piece of information a young man does not, at 18 months into an apprenticeship, know how to do anything useful with. I had said, "Ma'am, I am the apprentice. My master Franz is at lunch. He will be back in 20 minutes. Would you like to leave the book on the bench and I will have him look at it when he returns? Or would you like to wait?" Connie had looked at me, a stranger she had never seen before, and 18 months into his apprenticeship bookbinder standing next to a work in progress on a bench that smelled like leather and hide glue. And she had said, "I'll wait. Do you have a chair? And do you know how to make a cup of coffee?" I made her a cup of coffee. She waited for Franz. Franz came back. Franz took the job. It was a small recover of a family Bible, which was a job Franz had done 50 times over his career and could do in his sleep, and which he agreed to do for $22 in 1966 plus materials. And Connie signed the ticket and shook Franz's hand and shook mine and left. I watched her walk down the stairs. I turned to Franz. Franz was standing at his bench with a specific small smile I have thought about for the 59 years since. Franz said, "Leo, do not sand any boards this afternoon. Your mind is not on the trade. Go home. Come back tomorrow with your mind on the trade, and when the young lady comes back in 3 weeks to pick up her grandmother's Bible, I will find something for me to be at lunch for. Is that understood?" I said, "Yes, master." Franz said, "Good, now go." I went home. 3 weeks later, Connie came back. I bought her a coffee. That coffee lasted 4 hours. We were married on the 11th of June of 1968. And 48 years and 1 month later, in a hospice bed in what had been her sewing room on the 16th of July of 2016 at 7:41 a.m., my Connie squeezed my hand and said, without opening her eyes, in the last piece of her voice she had left, "Leo, trust the paper, honey, it will come around." And then she was gone. Trust the paper. That was Connie's last sentence. And 8 years and 49 days later, on the 3rd of September of last year, at 3:40 p.m., at my kitchen table with a cloth-bound ledger open in front of me, I trusted the paper, and the paper caught the piece that had come loose from the binding, and the paper opened the whole book back up so that the specific damage could be repaired. My Connie's voice was in every line of that ledger, and Connie's voice was on my shoulder in Warren's office at 4:16 p.m., and Connie's voice was on the drive home, and Connie's voice was at the kitchen table on the Sunday evening when Wesley walked in and put his hands flat on the table. Trust the paper. I have, every 3rd of the month, in ink, since March of 1985, and on the 3rd of September of last year, the paper trusted me back. Susan and Paul were married on the 12th of September of 1994 in the small chapel at the community church where Connie and I had been married 26 years earlier. Susan Ainsworth had become Susan Whitcomb that day, and Paul Whitcomb is, a decent, quiet, careful accountant who had grown up in a small farming town 3 counties over and had come to our city for college and had met Susan through mutual friends at a diner near the state university. Paul is 59 now and is still an accountant, working for a mid-sized firm that does the books for local businesses. And Paul is the kind of man who has kept his own paper checkbook for the whole of his adult life, and who, when I tell you that Paul is my son-in-law and has been for 31 years and has never given me a moment's trouble, I want you to hear that as the compliment it is meant to be. Paul is a good man. Paul was not the problem in this story. Paul's son was. Susan and Paul had 2 children. Wesley Paul Whitcomb, born on the 3rd of December of 1996. Connie held him at 17 minutes old in the delivery room and told me, in the hospital hallway 10 minutes later, "Leo, that boy is going to be a hard one. He has his father's calm and his grandfather Ainsworth's stubbornness and my own vanity, which is a bad combination in a man. We are going to have to watch him." I had thought at the time that Connie was joking. Connie was not joking. Connie could see the shape of a person from about 7 minutes into meeting them, and Connie had told me the shape of my grandson at 17 minutes into his life. And Connie had been right. Wesley was a hard one, not through any fault of his parents. Wesley was hard the way some boys are hard. Bright, restless, easily bored, quick with his hands, quick with a joke, hard to satisfy, and, this is the piece Connie had seen, hard to hold to a specific promise once he had gotten bored of the specific promise. Wesley graduated from a decent state college in 2018 with a business degree and got a job at a mid-sized property insurance broker in our town, and married a nice young woman named Marisol Vasquez when he was 23, and divorced her 18 months later without any children and without any drama for reasons neither of them ever fully explained to any of us, and moved into a small apartment on the north side of town, and had been living there since. 28 now, working the insurance job, not on the surface of things, drifting, but drifting. Connie had seen it on the 3rd of December of 1996 at 17 minutes of Wesley's life. Their second child is Nell Ainsworth Whitcomb, born on the 4th of March of 2002, 6 years younger than her brother. Susan and Paul had, I found out later, tried and failed for 4 years between the 2 births, and Nell was, in the specific gentle way Susan sometimes named things at Sunday supper, the child who was worth the waiting. Nell is my granddaughter, the one Connie decided at about age 4 was going to be a bookbinder, the one who spent every summer of her childhood at my Sunday afternoon workbench in the basement, the one who, this is the piece I want you to hear plainly, has been the piece of the family that has walked steady through every one of the last 18 months. Nell is 22 years old. Nell is halfway through the first year of a graduate program in library science and rare book conservation at a university that is 2 hours south of my house. Nell calls me every Wednesday evening at 6 p.m. for an hour on the phone. Nell comes to me every other weekend, on the train, for a Saturday afternoon 2-hour workshop session at my basement bench, where I teach her the specific piece of the trade she is working on that month at her school. Nell is going to be a serious rare book conservator by the time she is 30. Nell has known since she was 14 years old, and her grandmother told her at the hospice bed to make coffee on the morning her grandmother died, that Nell was going to inherit the small leather roll of bookbinding tools I have on the shelf above my basement bench. The roll that had come to this country from Frankfurt in 1949 with Franz Deutsch, that had passed to me on the day Franz died in 1975, and that has been on my bench for the 50 years since. Nell knows the roll is coming to her. That has never been in question. What Nell did not know until 18 months ago, because it did not come up, was that the specific piece of that inheritance she was going to be a piece of was the specific piece I am telling you about in this story. Nell does not know yet that her grandmother's ledger from 1985 is going to come to her too. I have not told her. I am going to tell her when she finishes her master's degree in 2 years. It will be a small moment. She will understand. Wesley grew up in the same house Nell grew up in, 4 blocks from mine, and had a good enough childhood. Wesley was at every Sunday supper at his grandmother's kitchen table from age 2 to age 18, without exception, except for one summer he spent at soccer camp when he was 13, and one Christmas week he spent skiing with his college roommate when he was 20. Wesley loved his grandmother the way a first grandchild loves his grandmother, which is with the specific full-hearted devotion of the first, unsplit yet by any younger siblings, aware that he was Connie's first and would always be. Wesley was, for the whole of his childhood, my Connie's specific favorite, in the specific way grandmothers have a first grandchild favorite that they do not admit to, and that everybody in the family knows about. Wesley knew about it. Wesley traded on it. Wesley was, by age 6, the specific young boy who could get his grandmother to give him a second slice of pie by asking a specific way. That was Wesley. Connie loved him for it. Connie also, from age 6, told him plain, "Wesley, I am giving you the second slice of pie because I love you. I am not giving it to you because you ask cleverly. Do you understand the difference? Because if you do not understand the difference now, you are going to have a hard time in your 20s when the world starts to notice that you are asking cleverly for things, and does not respond the way I respond." Wesley had said at 6, "Yes, Grandma." Connie had said, "Good. Now eat the pie." Connie had been trying, for the whole of Wesley's childhood, to teach him a specific piece of the trade of being a person that Wesley, and this is where I have to be honest with you, did not entirely learn. Wesley learned about 70% of it. The 30% Wesley did not learn was the piece that turned out to be the specific opening a smoother older man was going to walk through in Wesley's 27th year of life. I need to tell you about that man now, because he is the piece of the story that I want you to hold in your head as I tell the rest of it. His name, I'm not going to say his real name, because the case is on appeal, and Judith and my daughter both told me not to say it in any public forum, and I am respecting that. I am going to call him Marcus. Marcus was Wesley's roommate his sophomore year of college. Marcus was 2 years older than Wesley, a senior when Wesley was a sophomore, put in the same off-campus rental house with 3 younger men by an accident of the housing lottery. Marcus was, in that year, already the specific kind of smoother older man who would later run a Ponzi scheme. Marcus was charming. Marcus was quick. Marcus was, from the first time I met him at a Thanksgiving supper, Wesley brought him to when Wesley was 20 and Marcus was 22, the specific kind of person my Connie disliked on sight, and had told me so on the drive home from Susan and Paul's house that Thanksgiving night. Connie had said, "Leo, that boy Marcus is a piece of work. That boy is going to be, in some way I cannot yet name, a problem for our Wesley." I want you to remember that I said this tonight, because we are going to have a conversation about that boy in 10 years, and I want you to know I saw it first at Susan and Paul's Thanksgiving dinner in 2017. I had said, "Connie, he seemed all right, a little polished." Connie had said, "That is my point, Leo. He is too polished for a 22-year-old. I know what a well-raised 22-year-old looks like. That boy is not that. That boy has been polishing something. Wesley is going to be susceptible to him. Watch." Now, I had, over the following 7 years, watched Wesley stay in touch with Marcus at a distance. Marcus had gone into finance in the city. Marcus had done well. Marcus had, by the time Wesley was 26 and drifting in the wake of his divorce, become a man Wesley called for advice about money. And Marcus by then had, it turned out, already been running a specific piece of the Ponzi scheme for about 3 years, and had been recruiting friends and family into it as the outer ring of investors, and had recruited Wesley in the fall of 2023 with the specific pitch of, Wes, I've got a hedge on some crypto arbitrage that's making 22 to 28% quarterly, and I can bring you in at the family friends rate, and you can get out anytime you want, and you can watch it for 3 months. And if it doesn't feel right, you can pull the whole balance and I'll shake your hand, and we'll go back to being college roommates. Are you interested? Wesley was interested. Wesley put in his own $18,000, his entire savings at 26 years old after the divorce, in October of 2023. Wesley watched it for 2 months. The reports said the money had grown to $22,500 by December. In January, Wesley was in, and in January, Wesley, sitting in his small apartment on the north side of town, going through the paperwork of his first quarterly statement, staring at the amount that had been made on his $18,000, feeling for the first time in 18 months since the divorce that he was going to be, financially all right, decided to bring in his grandfather's money, not by asking. That is the piece that has been the hardest for me to hold. Not by asking, because Wesley knew on some level that I would say no, or that I would say yes and then would want to see paperwork Marcus would not provide, or that I would want to talk to Marcus directly and would ask Marcus questions Marcus did not want to answer. Or, this is the specific piece of Wesley I have thought about most in the 18 months since. Because Wesley did not want to admit to me that he had put his entire savings into a thing his college roommate had told him about. Wesley wanted to bring me into the return, not into the risk. Wesley wanted to double my money in 9 months and put it back before I ever noticed it was gone. Wesley wanted to be, in his own head, the grandson who had, quietly and without asking, made his grandfather twice as rich as before, and then to reveal the whole thing at some Sunday supper in the fall as a specific piece of grandfatherly reward. That is what Wesley told me at my kitchen table on the Sunday evening in September when the whole thing came apart. That is what Wesley told the FBI in his 11-hour proffer session in October. That is what Wesley told the courtroom under oath in April. And I want to tell you plainly because it is the piece of the story that matters most. Wesley believed it. He believed the scheme was real. He believed the money was going to double. He believed he was going to put my money back plus 22 to 28% by September, and I was never going to know it had ever moved. Wesley was wrong. He was wrong about all of it. But he was wrong from inside a specific set of numbers on a specific quarterly statement that Marcus had generated on Marcus's own computer to make Wesley believe. Marcus had generated similar statements for about 60 other investors. Every one of them was fake. There was no arbitrage. There was no fund. There was, in the end, only Marcus and a very carefully constructed set of PDF templates. And Wesley, in his own 26-year-old shape of not having been fully taught the 30% my Connie had been trying to teach him, had been the specific young man Marcus had needed. So had, it later turned out, about 59 other people. Marcus had built himself an entire ring of Wesleys. Every one of them was a young or old person who had trusted the wrong roommate, or the wrong nephew, or the wrong college mentor. Every one of them was going to lose everything, and Wesley, over the 8 months between January and August of last year, was going to transfer $85,600 of my savings into Marcus's scheme, in 12 installments, using SMS codes texted to a phone he had set up on Christmas afternoon at my kitchen table, with his grandmother's chair empty at the far end. Let me tell you about the Christmas afternoon, on which Wesley set up my phone, so that you have the shape of it in your head as I move on. Because in the light of what I now know, I can see the whole afternoon clearly, and I want you to see it too. It was Christmas Day of last year. Wesley had come to the house with Susan and Paul and Nell for Christmas dinner. I had cooked ham, the ham my Connie always cooked for Christmas dinner, the recipe from Connie's mother that Connie had made 47 times over our marriage. And Nell had made the applesauce, and Susan had made the mashed potatoes, and Paul had brought a pie. Wesley had brought a bottle of wine and a small wrapped present for me, which turned out to be a leather-bound notebook, and which I appreciated genuinely. And Wesley had, over dinner, made a small kind speech at the table, in Connie's absence, thanking me for keeping the tradition of the Christmas dinner alive, and telling me that his grandmother was proud, and telling Nell that she was next in line for the trade, and telling his mother that she was the reason he had made it to 28 in one piece. It was a nice speech. Wesley meant it. I mean that plainly. Wesley meant every word of that speech at my Christmas dinner. I want you to hold that in your head, because it is a piece of what makes Wesley more textured than a story about a grandson who stole from his grandfather usually gets to be. Wesley loved me. Wesley loved his grandmother. Wesley meant his Christmas speech. Wesley was also, at the specific moment he made the speech, 3 months into the Ponzi scheme with his own $18,000 at stake, and about 87 minutes away from doing the thing at my kitchen table that would set the whole of the next 18 months in motion. Both of those Wesleys were sitting at my Christmas dinner table on the 25th of December of last year. Both of them meant the speech. Both of them were going to be at my kitchen table with the new phone at 3:45 p.m. After dinner, I had mentioned to the family that my old flip phone, the little clamshell that Connie had bought me at the mall in 2010, that I had used for the 14 years since, had finally died. I had said it in passing at the table, over pie. I had said, the screen went dark on Thursday and I could not get it to come back on. I bought a new phone at the store on Friday. The salesperson helped me pick it out. It is still in the box on the kitchen counter. I have not opened it yet. Nell had looked up from her pie and said, Grandpa, I can set it up for you. It's easy. I know exactly where all the settings are. I've done it for my roommates at school. Wesley had put his fork down. Wesley had said, quicker than the shape of a Christmas conversation usually goes, Nell, you're the guest today. Let me do it, sis. I'll take Grandpa's phone into the kitchen right now and set it up while Mom and Paul do the dishes. It'll take me an hour tops. Nell, you should stay in the living room with everybody. Nell had shrugged. Nell had said, okay, if you want. I'm going to help Mom with the dishes. Nell had gone to the kitchen with Susan. Wesley had taken my phone box off the counter. Wesley had sat at my kitchen table, in the chair he had sat in for every Christmas dinner of his life, in the chair his father Paul actually sits in for regular dinners. Paul had, at dessert, moved to the couch in the living room to look at his phone, because Paul is not much of a chit-chat man after a big meal. And Wesley had begun to open the box. I did not sit with Wesley while he set up the phone. I was in the living room with Susan and Paul and Nell, drinking coffee and watching a football game. None of us was really watching. Wesley was in the kitchen alone, at the table, with my new phone and Connie's little brown cloth-bound ledger open on the counter 3 feet away, because I had left it there from my December 3rd reconciliation 22 days earlier. Wesley did not touch the ledger. This is a piece I want to say plainly, because I have thought about it and I want you to know. Wesley did not touch the ledger. He did not need to. What Wesley needed was in the little address book my Connie had kept in the drawer of the small side table by the phone in the living room. A small blue address book Connie had bought at the same stationery store in 1987 and had kept for the 29 years until her death, and that I have kept in the same drawer since. That had, on the back page, in Connie's careful handwriting, our credit union account numbers, our password hints, my social security number, and the answers to the various security questions Connie and I had picked out in the mid-1990s to protect the account. Connie had, at some point in the fall of 1998, showed Wesley the little blue address book. Connie had done it because Wesley had been visiting for the weekend, and Wesley had, at 3 years old, been curious about the small drawer in the small side table, and Connie had, being Connie, decided to teach him rather than shoo him away. Connie had shown him the front pages, the address section, but she had said to him, "This is Grandma's book. This is where I keep the important things. I want you to know it is here. When you are grown up, I might teach you what is on the back page, but not yet." Wesley had, over the 24 years since, remembered where the book was. He remembered on that Christmas afternoon. And Wesley did not, if we are being completely honest about it, need the back page for most of what he was going to do. He had the phone number, he had the security answers, he had my mother's maiden name from being my grandson. But he needed a specific piece of information that was only in the little blue book. And he got up from the kitchen table at maybe 4:15 p.m., walked into the living room, said to me over the football game, "Grandpa, I'm just double-checking a couple of the answers for the account setup. Is it okay if I peek in Grandma's little address book? I remember she kept some of the passwords in it, right?" And I had said, without particularly thinking about it, "Yes, Wesley, go ahead. It's in the side table drawer. I don't remember the last time I opened it. Take what you need and put it back." Wesley had said, "Thanks, Grandpa." He had gotten the little blue book. He had brought it into the kitchen. He had opened it to the back page. He had copied down what he needed on a piece of paper he had brought with him. And he had in that afternoon, over the course of about 3.5 hours between 4:02 p.m. and 7:28 p.m., done all of the following things at my kitchen table in the chair his father sits in at regular dinners with my new phone in his hands. He had added his own phone number as a trusted device on my Apple account. He had added his own phone number as a recovery number on my email account. He had logged into Prairie Credit Union's online portal using the credentials from Connie's little blue book. He had reset the online banking password using the two-factor code that was texted to my phone and that he suppressed the notification on before I could see it. He had added his own new receiving account, a new one he had opened in the fall specifically for this purpose, at a small online-only bank Marcus had recommended, as a linked external transfer account. He had set up an automatic forwarding rule on my carrier's website using the carrier credentials from Connie's book, forwarding every incoming text message to his own phone and dismissing the notifications from mine. He had done all of it silently at my kitchen table, in socks with a piece of paper by his hand, and Connie's little blue book by his elbow while the football game played in the next room. At 7:28 p.m., Wesley came into the living room with my new phone in his hand. He said, "Grandpa, all set. Come here. I'll show you the basics." I stood up. Wesley walked me through the home screen. He showed me the Messages app. He showed me the Banks app. He showed me the weather. He showed me the phone. He showed me how to answer a call. He said, "If any of the alerts come through weird, just tell me, and I'll come over and fix them. But it should all be smooth from here on out." "Okay, Grandpa?" I had said, "Okay, Wesley. Thank you, son." It was a good Christmas. Wesley had hugged me. He had kissed his grandmother's chair on the way past the kitchen table, which is a thing Wesley has done at every visit since Connie died, and which broke me the first time I saw him do it, and which I want you to know he still did on Christmas Day of last year, with a piece of paper in his pocket that had my social security number on it. Wesley kissed his grandmother's chair. That is who Wesley was on that day, both of him. He hugged me, kissed his grandmother's chair, put on his coat, and drove home to his apartment. He got in bed at midnight. He did not sleep. He would tell me later, at my kitchen table on the Sunday evening in September, when he finally came clean, that he had lain awake in his bed on the night of December, the 25th of last year, for 6.5 hours, staring at the ceiling of his apartment, feeling sick, and had gotten up at 6:30 a.m. On December the 26th, and had driven to a diner and had ordered coffee and eggs and had not eaten the eggs, and had, at 8:04 a.m. on the 26th of December, gotten a text message from Marcus saying, "How did it go, Wes? Everything set up?" And Wesley had texted back, "Yeah, all set. Give me a week to make sure the forwarding is working clean, then we'll start the transfers." And Marcus had texted back, "Attaboy, this is going to be huge. Your grandfather is going to thank you when he sees the returns. Let's do this." Wesley had put his phone in his pocket, paid for his coffee, walked out of the diner, sat in his car in the parking lot for another 20 minutes, and driven home. That was the 26th of December. 9 days later, on the 4th of January, Wesley executed the first transfer. $2,200. It went through. Marcus's fake platform generated a confirmation number and a screenshot. Wesley took the screenshot as evidence that the money had arrived safely in the fund. Wesley slept, for the first time in 9 days, all the way through the night. The next transfer went on the 18th of January, $2,900. Then, the 11th of February, $3,400. Then, the 25th of February. Then, the 10th of March. Then, the 7th of April. Then, the 5th of May. Then, the 3rd of June. Then, the 24th of June. Then, the 22nd of July. Then the 5th of August, and then the 7th of August. The transfer that, on the 3rd of September at my kitchen table, would break the surface of my ledger and end the whole shape of the 8-month operation. 12 transfers. $85,600. Every one of them out. Every one of them into Marcus's fund. Every one of them on Marcus's fake platform, growing at about 24% a quarter. And on the 25th of August, 10 days before my reconciliation, the FBI raided Marcus's office in the city. Marcus was arrested. His platform went dark. The fund was frozen. Every dollar was in the wind. Wesley, on the 25th of August, had 18,000 of his own money and 85,600 of mine in a scheme that had just been publicly declared a Ponzi. Wesley had, I have to say this plain because it is what he told me at my kitchen table in September. Wesley had, on the night of the 25th of August, sat in his apartment and thought about killing himself. He had not. He had instead made a plan. He had decided to tell me. He had decided to tell his parents. He had decided to walk into the FBI's field office and offer to cooperate. He was going to do it on the following Monday, the 2nd of September. And on the 2nd of September, at 11 p.m., the night before he was going to walk into the FBI office, Wesley had been unable to sleep and had been sitting on the couch in his apartment, trying to draft an email to his mother, explaining the whole thing. Wesley had not sent the email. Wesley was going to send it the next morning, the morning of the 3rd of September. Wesley did not send it because, and this is the piece that has become the piece Wesley and I talk about most at our second Sunday suppers. His old man of a grandfather had on the 3rd of September at 3:40 p.m. before Wesley could send the email, sat down at his kitchen table to reconcile his ledger, and the ledger had done what Connie had bought it in 1985 to do. The ledger had caught the 12th transfer. Warren had gotten a call at 3:42 p.m. Wesley never sent the email because the ledger got there first. I drove home from Warren's desk at 5:42 p.m. that Tuesday evening. I stopped on the way at the small deli 2 blocks from my house. Warren had told me not to stop, but Warren had meant it as care, and I was, in the specific way old men are, tired of being cared for that afternoon. And I bought a small sandwich and I brought it home, and I ate it at my kitchen table with the ledger open in front of me, and I did not cry. I want to tell you that. I did not cry on the day I found out. I have thought about why since, and I think it is because I had been, from the moment Warren had said the word Wesley, in the specific quiet mental workshop a bookbinder goes into when a book comes in bad shape. I had, that whole afternoon and evening, been taking my grandson's binding apart in my head, looking at where the stitches had failed, looking at where the mole had dried out, looking at where the block was still solid. I was not crying. I was diagnosing. That is the piece of the trade that saves you when the trade turns out, once in your life, to be applied to your own family. You are still a bookbinder. You are always a bookbinder. And a bookbinder at his own family's binding is the same bookbinder he is at somebody else's family's binding. Patient, careful, unrushed, curious about where the damage came from, uninterested in blame in the moment, because blame is not what fixes a spine. You can allocate blame later. In the moment, you look at the book. I called Susan at 8:31 p.m. I sat at the kitchen table with the ledger open in front of me, and I called my daughter's cell phone, and Susan answered on the second ring in the specific voice she uses when she picks up her father's evening call and knows something is going on because I do not usually call in the evening. Susan said, "Dad, what is it? Are you all right?" I said, "Susan, I am all right. I am at the kitchen table. I am not sick. There is nothing wrong with me physically. I need to tell you what has been going on with Wesley over the last 8 months, and I need to do it now on the phone because I do not want you to hear it from anybody else. Is Paul home? I would like to tell you both at the same time. Can you put me on speaker?" Susan said, "Dad, yes, Paul is here. Hold on." She put me on speaker. Paul said, "Quiet." "Leo, what's happened?" I said, "Paul, Susan, I want you to sit down before I start. Take a minute, get a cup of water. I am going to tell you a long story, and I want you both sitting for it." I heard them sit down. I heard Susan get up and get a glass of water and sit back down. Then I told them. I told them what I had found in the ledger. I told them what Warren had shown me. I told them about the SMS forwarding. I told them about TCP Holdings and Titan Capital Partners. I told them about the 85,600. I told them about Special Agent Roberts. I told them Judith Kowalski was on the case as of 5 p.m. And then, after all of that, I told them the piece that I could see, from 22 hours distance and the ledger open in front of me, that they needed to hear before we went any further. I said, "Susan, Paul, your boy is in a great deal of trouble. Your boy has done a terrible thing, and I am going to tell you what I have decided to do. I am going to bring Wesley here on Sunday evening, just Wesley. I am going to lay out what I know at my kitchen table. I am going to give him one chance to tell me the whole truth in one sitting. If he does, and I have a specific feeling, Susan, that he is going to, Because I have known your son for 28 years, and I know the specific way he goes quiet when he is carrying a thing he cannot carry. If he does, then I am going to work with him and with Judith and with Special Agent Roberts to make him a witness in the federal case, and to get him to cooperate fully with the investigation, and to get whatever restitution the federal clawback can produce for our savings back into my accounts, and to have him pay back the rest over the next 15 years in small automatic increments from his paychecks. And I am not going to press criminal charges from my side. That is my decision, Susan. And I have made it, and I want you and Paul to hear it before Sunday. You are going to be at the house on Sunday too. I want that. You are his parents. But I want the first hour to be Wesley and me. Just Wesley and me and Judith and Agent Roberts on the phone. And then you and Paul come at 7. That is what I have set up. Is that all right with you? Susan was quiet for a long time on the other end of the phone. Then Susan said, in the voice my daughter uses when she is trying very hard not to fall apart in front of her father on the phone, Dad, Dad, yes. Yes, that is all right with me. I am so sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. He is my son. I am so sorry, Dad. Paul said, quiet. Leo, I have never known what to say when my son does something that requires me to say something. I want to say, I do not know how this happened, but I want to say, I trust you, Leo. I trust your instinct on this. If you want to see him alone first, see him alone first. Susan and I will be at your house at 7 on Sunday. I will not let Susan come earlier. I will hold her at our house until 7. That is my job. Thank you for calling us tonight and not tomorrow morning. I said, Paul, thank you. Susan, I love you. Try to sleep, both of you. This is going to be hard for a couple of weeks, but it is going to be all right. It is. I am telling you both that from the other side of 8 decades of thinking about how bindings hold and where they fail. Wesley's binding is not lost. It is loose. That is not the same thing. Try to sleep. Susan said, Dad, I love you. Thank you. Paul said, good night, Leo. I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for another hour with the ledger open in front of me. Then I closed the ledger. I put it on the shelf above the ledger's usual spot. I did not put it back in its usual spot because I wanted to see it in a slightly different place when I came into the kitchen the next morning as a small physical reminder that I was inside of something. I went upstairs to bed at 10:45. I did not sleep. I do not remember thinking a lot in the 8 hours I was lying in bed. I remember mostly the sound of my Connie's voice from a very long ago Sunday afternoon at our bench in the basement, showing me how to sew a signature onto a cord using a kettle stitch and saying in her patient voice, Leo, slow down. The stitch does not care how fast you go. The stitch cares whether you catch the previous stitch in the tail. Catch the previous stitch. That is the whole trade. Every stitch catches the one before it. That is what makes the binding hold across time. It is not the thickness of the thread. It is the specific way each stitch reaches back and grabs the one behind it. I lay in bed on the night of the 3rd of September, and I thought about my Connie's kettle stitch lesson from 1973, and I understood at some point around 4 a.m. that the shape of what I was going to do with Wesley over the next 15 years was one long kettle stitch. Each Sunday supper reaching back and catching the previous one. Each restitution payment reaching back and catching the previous one. Each meeting with the FBI reaching back and catching the previous one. The whole binding held not by the thickness of any single element, but by the specific way every element caught the one before it. That was the shape of the repair. That was Connie's lesson from 1973 coming back on the 4th of September of last year at 4 a.m. in my bedroom. Connie taught me that. Connie's ledger caught the 12th transfer. Connie's blue book was on Wesley's elbow at Christmas. Connie was in every square inch of what was going to happen. She was gone 8 years. She was in every stitch. Judith Kowalski came to my house at 9 on Wednesday morning. Judith is 74 years old, and Judith has been a lawyer in this town for 49 years. And Judith is my Connie's first cousin, once removed on her mother's side. Judith and Connie grew up 2 houses apart on the same block in the west end of the city. Judith went to law school. Connie went to nursing school. The 2 of them stayed close their whole lives, which is a piece I want you to know, because Judith cried in my kitchen on Wednesday morning when I opened the door. She hugged me. She sat down at my kitchen table. She poured her own coffee. She opened her briefcase. She said, "Leo, Connie called me on the 12th of July of 2016, 4 days before she died, and asked me to promise her that if anything ever went wrong with any of you Ainsworth Whitcombs down the line, I would come. I promised her. I have been ready for 8 years. I am glad it was Wesley and not something worse. This is going to be hard, but it is not going to be lost, Leo. Now. Let me tell you what I have set up with Agent Roberts, and then let me tell you what I want to do on Sunday evening, and then let me tell you what your job is between now and then. All right?" I said. "Judith, all right, go." Judith laid out the shape. Special Agent Diane Roberts, a 14-year FBI veteran in the Economic Crimes Unit, had been in the middle of winding down the Titan Capital Partners case for 11 days already, by the time Warren had called her Tuesday afternoon. Agent Roberts had, as of Wednesday morning, 341 identified victims across the scheme and about 72 identified investors who had recruited other investors, the outer ring that Marcus had built, of which Wesley was one. Agent Roberts had already, per Judith, decided that the outer ring investors were, from the federal case's point of view, more valuable as cooperating witnesses than as defendants, because Marcus was the real target, and Marcus's conviction was going to rest on the testimony of about 15 to 20 of the outer ring investors who could describe, in specific terms, how Marcus had recruited them, what he had told them, what paperwork he had shown them, and what promises he had made. Agent Roberts wanted Wesley on the witness list. Agent Roberts had told Judith, on their phone call at 4 p.m. on Tuesday, that if Wesley cooperated fully, sat for a proffer session, provided every document he had, testified truthfully at trial, the U.S. Attorney's Office would recommend against filing charges against Wesley for his own participation in the scheme, and Wesley would be treated in the federal case as a victim witness rather than as a co-defendant. That was the offer on the table from the FBI's side, and it was contingent on Wesley walking into a proffer session inside of the next 10 days. Judith wanted the proffer session on Tuesday of the following week. She wanted the Sunday evening at my house as the private moment where Wesley made his choice. She wanted Susan and Paul in the room after the first hour so that Wesley had his mother and father with him for what came next. She wanted the ledger open on the table. She wanted the Titan Capital Partners transfer log open next to it. She wanted Agent Roberts on speakerphone. She wanted me at the head of the table. She wanted Connie's chair to stay empty. She wanted Wesley in the chair to my right, the chair he had sat in his whole life. And she wanted no theatrics. She wanted a plain, careful, quiet 3 hours of laying out what had happened and asking Wesley the specific question, "Are you going to cooperate?" and letting Wesley answer, and then getting to work on what came next. I said, "Judith, yes to all of it. Set it up. What is my job between now and Sunday?" Judith said, "Leo, your job is to sit with what your grandson has done and to arrive at Sunday evening at 6 p.m. with the specific version of yourself you want to be at that table, because the version of yourself you bring to that table is the version that decides what the next 15 years of your grandson's life look like. You have 5 days. Use them. Do not call Wesley. Do not text Wesley. Do not answer if he calls you. If he does, let it go to voicemail, and I will handle the call back through my office. Do not tell anyone else in the family, just Susan and Paul, and now me and Warren and Alma at the credit union and Agent Roberts. That is the whole circle for now. Nell does not know. She should not know until Sunday night. Wesley does not know that you know. Let him drift for 5 days. Sunday evening he is going to arrive at your house for what he thinks is a regular family dinner, and he is going to see me, and he is going to see the ledger, and he is going to see the folder, and he is going to see who is not there. His parents are not there, initially. And he is going to have about 90 seconds to decide what shape of himself he is going to be for the rest of his life. That 90 seconds is the whole story. And your job, Leo, between now and Sunday, is to be the specific old bookbinder who can, in those 90 seconds, look at his grandson across a kitchen table and give him the specific look that lets him choose to tell the truth. That look is not something you can rehearse. That look is something you have to arrive at by working through what has happened in your own head for 5 days. So, go work, and I will see you Sunday at 5:30. Judith kissed me on the cheek. She left. I sat at my kitchen table. I put my hand on the back of Connie's chair. I said out loud, "Connie, Judith says I have 5 days to become the specific version of me I want to be at that table on Sunday. "Help me, honey, I do not know how to do this alone." And I felt her, the way I have felt her for 8 years, at the right shoulder from behind. And I heard Connie say back, quiet, in the kitchen, "Leo, you have been that specific version of yourself since 1966, when I walked up the stairs of Franz's workshop with my grandmother's Bible. You do not have to become anybody. You have to be the man I married. That man knows what to do on Sunday. Trust him. He has been in you the whole time, and he has been holding a bone folder in his right hand for 58 years. He knows how to crease a fold. He knows how to set a spine. Now, go to the basement and work on a book for the next 5 days. Do the work with your hands. The Sunday version of you will assemble itself while your hands are moving. I love you, honey. Go work." I went to the basement. I worked on a book. I worked on a book for 5 days. Every morning I got up at 6, I did my exercises, I ate breakfast, I went to the basement, and I worked on the small restoration of a 1902 family Bible I had been holding for a customer for 2 months. I worked on it every day from 7 to 11, and from 1 to 5, with a break for lunch. I did not think about Wesley while I worked. I let the Sunday version of me assemble itself in the way Connie had said it would. And by 5:30 on Sunday afternoon, when Judith rang the front doorbell, I understood, in the exact way an old bookbinder understands the fold of a signature under a bone folder, that I was ready. Judith walked in. She looked at me. She said, "Leo, you've done the work. I can see it. Now let's set the table." Judith and I set the table. My kitchen table is a plain oak table my Connie and I bought in 1972 at a small furniture store on the east side of town. It has been in this kitchen for 53 years. It has seats for 6. We put Judith to my left, at Connie's usual chair side, and we left Connie's chair, at the far end, empty as we always do. We put the folder from Warren and the folder from Judith, and the paper transcript of the SMS forwarding rule Warren had pulled from the carrier, in a stack on the table to the right of my place. We put Connie's ledger, the one she had bought in March of 1985, open on the table to my right, flat, on the page where the 12th transfer had first stopped my pen on the 3rd of September. Judith set up her laptop on the table beside her, with the FBI's speakerphone dial-in number ready. She looked around the kitchen. She said, "Leo, this is a good setting. Do not add anything. Wesley is going to walk in and see exactly what he needs to see." Wesley came at 5:58. He walked up the front walk. I could see him from the kitchen window over the sink, walking the way Wesley has walked since he was 14, head slightly down, hands in his pockets, shoulders forward. He knocked at the front door with the specific quick knock he has used since he was 6 years old. I opened the door. I said, "Wesley, come in, son. Take your coat off." Wesley came in. He took his coat off. He hung it on the hook by the door where he has hung his coat since he was 5 years old. He turned around, and I watched the specific 90 seconds Judith had told me about happen at my grandson's face, in the specific sequence Judith had said they would. He saw Judith at the kitchen table first, Judith in her plain gray suit, with her briefcase closed at her feet and her laptop open in front of her. And Wesley's face registered Judith with a slight puzzlement, because he had met Judith at family occasions his whole life, but had not been expecting her in my kitchen on a Sunday evening. His eyes traveled from Judith to the 2 folders stacked on the table, and then from the folders to my Connie's ledger, open flat on the page where my pen had stopped on the 3rd of September, and then from the ledger to me, seated at the head of the table with my coffee mug in front of me and my hands folded on the wood, the way they had been folded for the 12 minutes before the doorbell rang. And I want to say, because I had spent 5 days in the basement working on a 1902 family Bible, so that this specific moment would find me at the specific version of myself I wanted to be. I want to say that I sat still. I did not speak. I did not gesture. I did not soften. I did not harden. I let Wesley see the whole tableau in his own time, and I let him arrive at the specific 90 seconds Judith had told me about at his own speed. And I let his own eyes and his own conscience walk him through the specific sequence in the specific order they were going to walk him through it. That is what a bookbinder does when a book comes to his bench. He lets the book show him what is wrong with it. He does not tell the book. He listens. And I watch my grandson's face, in the specific 90 seconds Judith had told me about, go through 3 specific things. The first thing on Wesley's face was surprise. The second thing was calculation. A very fast calculation, the calculation of a young man trying to figure out what he was inside of and what shape of exit was available to him. The third thing, the piece that Judith had said the whole rest of the 15 years would rest on, the third thing was, and I want you to hear this the way I felt it, relief. My grandson's face in the second and a half between when he saw Judith and when he sat down went to a specific tired relief that told me, in one clean look, that Wesley had been carrying this for 8 months and had, in his own way, been waiting for this doorbell for weeks. He had drafted the email on Monday night. He had not sent it. He had come to Sunday supper thinking on some level that this Sunday was going to be the one. It was. He knew it inside of 6 seconds. And the piece that made me proudest at the shape of the moment, because I have to tell you plainly, I was proud of my grandson in the specific 90 seconds Judith had told me about, before anybody had said a word, was that Wesley did not, at any point in the 90 seconds, try to run. He walked to the kitchen table. He sat down in the chair to my right. He put his hands flat on the table so we could all see them. He looked at me. He looked at Judith. He said, before Judith or I had said a word, "Grandpa, I did it. I did all of it. I have been carrying it for 8 months. I want to tell you everything now, and I want to tell them everything now, and I want to do whatever I have to do to make it right. I am so sorry, Grandpa. I am so sorry." Judith looked at me. I looked at Wesley. I said, "Wesley, thank you, son. Thank you for saying that first. Now, sit still for a minute. Judith is going to call Special Agent Diane Roberts of the FBI in the city. She is going to be on the phone in this kitchen. And then Judith is going to explain what we have set up. And then you and I and Judith are going to talk about what you are going to do. Your mother and Paul are going to be here at 7. That gives you and me and Judith and Agent Roberts 1 hour. Are you ready, son?" Wesley said, "Yes, Grandpa." Judith dialed. Agent Roberts came on the line. Her voice was warm and quick and steady. She said, "Mr. Ainsworth, Mrs. Kowalski. Wesley, this is Special Agent Diane Roberts of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Economic Crimes Unit, Eastern District. Wesley, I want you to know before we go any further that this call is not being recorded and that anything you say to me tonight is what we call a proffer conversation, and it is protected from being used against you at trial. This is a specific legal mechanism designed to let a young person in your position tell the whole truth without fear that his own words will be used against him. If you tell me what you know tonight, and if you sign a formal proffer agreement inside of the next 10 days at our field office in the city, and if you continue to cooperate fully with the investigation through the trial next spring, the U.S. Attorney's Office is prepared to recommend against filing charges against you for your own participation in the movement of your grandfather's money. You will testify at Marcus Bellamy's trial as a witness, not as a co-defendant. You will spend in total about 40 hours over the next 8 months meeting with my team and preparing your testimony. You will be on the witness stand at trial for probably a full day. And if you do all of that, Wesley, then when the trial is over, you and your grandfather can begin the work of restitution and repair without a federal record hanging over you. That is the offer from our side. Do you understand it, Wesley?" Wesley said, in a voice that I was proud to hear, "Stay steady." "Yes, Agent Roberts, I understand." Agent Roberts said, "Good. Then, before we do anything else, Wesley, I want you to tell me, in your own words, what you did with your grandfather's money over the last 8 months. Take your time. Do not skip anything. Do not spare yourself. Tell me all of it. Your grandfather is sitting 3 feet from you. He is going to hear it. I want it in his ear tonight, and I want it in my ear tonight, and I want it in Mrs. Kowalski's ear tonight, so that when the 4 of us walk out of your grandfather's kitchen at 7 p.m., we have the same story in all 4 heads. Go, Wesley." Wesley told the story. He told the whole story. He told it the way I heard him tell it later, on the witness stand in April, and the way I have heard him tell it in various shapes at his monthly suppers with me for the 18 months since. From Marcus's original pitch in the fall of 2023, through his own 18,000 going in October, through the December quarterly statement that convinced him it was real, through the decision on Christmas afternoon to set up my phone, through the 12 transfers on their exact dates and exact amounts, through the FBI raid on August the 25th, through his own night of despair on August the 25th, through the plan he had made to come clean, through the email he had drafted Monday night and not sent, through the 8 months of not sleeping properly, through the specific way he had lied to his mother when Susan had asked him at Easter dinner whether he was all right, through the specific way he had kissed his grandmother's chair on the way past the kitchen, table at every Sunday supper of the last 8 months, carrying my money in his phone and not being able to look Connie in the memory. Wesley told all of it. He told it plain. He did not blame Marcus, though Marcus was the criminal. He named his own agency clearly. He said the sentence at the end of the whole story that I have thought about since and that Agent Roberts told Judith afterward was the specific sentence that convinced her the U.S. attorney would agree to the proffer offer. Wesley said, "Agent Roberts, I did not know Marcus was running a Ponzi scheme. I believed the fund was real. That does not matter. I stole from my grandfather because I did not want to admit to him or to my mother that I had lost my own $18,000, and I wanted to be the grandson who quietly made him rich. I stole from him for my own pride. Marcus made me a tool of his scheme, but I made myself the tool of my own vanity. I am not going to hide behind Marcus. My grandfather deserves the whole truth. I took $85,600 from him because I was too ashamed to ask, and because I wanted to be the person who fixed it before anybody knew it was broken. That is my crime. That is what I did. And I am going to spend the next 15 years paying it back and telling my grandfather the truth every second Sunday of the month at his kitchen table for as long as he wants to hear it. That is the shape of what I have to do. I know it, and I want to start tonight." He stopped. He looked at me. Judith looked at me. Agent Roberts on the speakerphone said, quiet, "Mr. Ainsworth, do you want to say anything to your grandson?" I sat at my kitchen table with the ledger to my right and the folders to my right and my grandson 3 feet away with his hands flat on the table. And I looked at the young man I had held at 12 minutes old in a hospital hallway on the 3rd of December of 1996. And I said, in the plainest voice I could put on, "Wesley, thank you for telling me the whole truth. Thank you for telling Agent Roberts the whole truth. Thank you for saying, at the end there, what you said. I want to tell you one thing now. I forgive you. I forgive you as of this minute at my kitchen table. I forgave you at 4:18 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon when Warren Ellis said your name across his desk. Because at 4:18 p.m. on Tuesday afternoon, I understood on some level that a young man does not get himself into $85,600 of secret theft against his own grandfather unless the young man is drowning inside of something. I did not know then what you were drowning inside of. I know now. And knowing what you were drowning inside of, I forgive you. That is done. Now, I want to tell you what happens next. And I want to tell you what I need from you over the next 15 years in exchange for a grandfather's forgiveness that does not have any strings attached to it in terms of my love, but that has some very specific strings attached to it in terms of my trust. Trust and love are not the same thing, Wesley. I want you to hear me say that. In Judith's hearing and Agent Roberts' hearing at the beginning of this, trust is going to be rebuilt one small stitch at a time over the next 15 years, in kettle stitches at the top and the bottom of every signature, and every stitch is going to catch the previous one, and the whole binding is going to hold across time if we do the work right. That is the shape. Are you willing to do the work, son? Wesley said, Grandpa, yes. I am willing to do all of it. I am willing to do more, if there is more. Tell me what you need. I told him. Judith and I had drafted the terms over the previous 3 days. I read them at my kitchen table, plain, in the order Judith had said would be easiest to hear. 1. Wesley signs the formal proffer agreement with the U.S. Attorney's Office inside of 10 days and cooperates fully with the FBI investigation through Marcus Bellamy's trial, testifying truthfully at trial, providing every document he has, and meeting with Agent Roberts' team as many times as required over the 8 months to trial. 2. Wesley agrees that whatever restitution money is recovered for me through the Federal Clawback Fund at the conclusion of the case comes directly to me and is applied against the $85,600 in an accounting Wesley and I keep in a small brown cloth-bound ledger I was going to buy the following morning at the stationery store on Elm Street, a fresh ledger matching the ones Connie had bought, dedicated to this specific restitution. 3. Wesley signs a promissory note for the entire $85,600, less whatever the federal clawback returns, payable to me over 15 years, structured as an automatic bi-weekly deduction from Wesley's paycheck at the insurance broker, At an interest rate, I set it 0 because I did not want interest on this one and did not need it and did not want the note to feel like a debt in the sense of a debt to a bank. This was a debt to a grandfather. The number would be paid, but I would not profit on the payment. Wesley would. 4. Wesley comes to my house for supper on the second Sunday of every month for 15 years. Just Wesley. Not with his parents, not with his sister, not with a girlfriend if he has one, not with anybody. Just Wesley, from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. He does not miss one. If a work conflict comes up, he moves the work. If a girlfriend does not understand, she is the wrong girlfriend. If he is out of town, he is at my kitchen table by video from wherever he is, at 6 p.m. sharp, every second Sunday of every month for 15 years. That is 180 suppers. That is not a number he is going to like at the beginning. It is the number that is going to save his life at the end. He does not know that yet. I do. 5. Wesley opens the ledger with me. He keeps it. In his own hand. In ink. On the 3rd of every month, matching the discipline his grandmother set in 1985. Not the credit union ledger. That one is mine. A specific ledger for his restitution and his life. He enters his paycheck, his rent, his food, his utilities, his savings, his restitution payment, and any specific piece of his life he wants to enter. I do not audit the ledger. I do not check it against his statements. He keeps it. It is his book, but he brings it to every second Sunday supper. He shows me the current month's page. He explains anything he wants to explain. I do not question. I look. That is the discipline. He carries the ledger. His grandmother's ledger is going to end up his book too, in a different way. That is the shape. I read the 5 terms out loud at my kitchen table. Wesley listened, Judith listened, Agent Roberts on the phone listened. When I was done, I looked at Wesley and I said, Wesley, those are the 5 terms. Do you want time to think about them, or do you want to answer now? Wesley said, Grandpa, I do not need time. I accept all 5. I want to sign whatever needs to be signed, and I want to say the ledger part. That is the piece that I want to say something about. I have not kept a ledger in my life. I have not written by hand more than a signature since college. If you are asking me to keep a handwritten ledger in ink on the 3rd of every month and to bring it to you every second Sunday, then what you are giving me, I want to hear myself say this out loud. What you are giving me is the piece of grandma I have never had. I have never had her ledger. Nell had it, because Nell went to your basement. I did not. I know that is my own fault. But I want to say, the ledger term is the term I want most, Grandpa. That is the one. I am going to keep it. I want to keep it. Please help me start it. Please. I looked at my grandson at my kitchen table on a Sunday evening at 6:47 p.m., and I understood, in the specific way an old bookbinder understands the fold of a signature under a bone folder, that the 90-second window Judith had told me about, the window Agent Roberts had been listening for on the phone, the window Wesley's whole next 15 years had been going to fold around, had closed cleanly, and the fold had been made, and the book was going to hold. I said, Wesley, thank you, son. Yes, I will help you start it. We will start it on the 3rd of October. That gives you a month to sit with the shape of your life and think about what you want to record. On the 3rd of October, you come to this kitchen at 7 p.m., and we start it. I have already bought the ledger. It is on the shelf in the pantry. Your grandmother would have wanted it that way. Now, Judith, where do we sign? Judith laid the papers out. Wesley signed the proffer commitment letter. Wesley signed the promissory note. Wesley signed a formal acknowledgement of the 12 transfers by date and amount, in his own handwriting, on a piece of paper Judith would file with Agent Roberts. Wesley signed the second Sunday of the month commitment. Wesley signed the ledger discipline commitment, all in ink, all at my kitchen table, all in about 18 minutes. Susan and Paul arrived at 7:02 p.m. They rang the doorbell. I opened the door. Susan looked at me. Paul looked past me at the kitchen. I said, Come in. Wesley has told me everything. He is going to cooperate with the FBI. He has signed everything. He is going to come to supper every second Sunday for 15 years. He is not going to be charged. He is going to be all right. Susan cried in the doorway. Paul put his hand on Susan's back. They walked in. Wesley stood up from the kitchen table. Wesley walked to his mother. Wesley hugged his mother. He said, Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Susan held her son for maybe 40 seconds. She said, in a voice I have to say broke me. "Wesley, I love you, sweetheart. We are going to get through this. We are." Paul stepped forward. Paul is not a big hugger. Paul put his hand on Wesley's shoulder, and he said, "Son, sit down. Let's eat something." That was how the evening at 7 o'clock began. Judith stayed for another 20 minutes. She left at 7:22. Agent Roberts hung up at 7:05. And Susan and Paul and Wesley and I sat at my kitchen table at 7:25 p.m., with Connie's chair empty at the far end. And we ate a supper Susan had brought over in a covered dish. And we did not talk about the case for the whole rest of the evening. We talked about Nell. We talked about Susan's job at the hospital. We talked about Paul's father in the small farming town 3 counties over. We talked about the maples starting to turn. And Wesley sat at the kitchen table in the chair to my right and ate 2 portions of pot roast, and I understood. Watching my grandson eat 2 portions of pot roast at my kitchen table on the Sunday evening in September, that a young man who eats 2 portions of pot roast at his grandfather's kitchen table on the night he has just signed away the next 15 years of his life is a young man who is not lost. He is a young man who is inside of a piece of infrastructure. He is a young man whose grandmother, 8 years and 2 months earlier, had set the specific stitch that was going to catch every subsequent stitch for the next 15 years. He is a young man who is home. Let me tell you what has happened over the 18 months since. Because a story about a young man in a federal cooperation agreement is a story that has to be told carefully, and I do not want to make it clean, or make it easy, or make it the kind of story that suggests every young man in Wesley's shoes comes out of a federal case the way Wesley has. Some do not. Agent Roberts told me plain, at a follow-up meeting in February, that of the 72 outer ring investors in the Titan Capital Partners case, 31 had accepted proffer agreements, 11 had cooperated fully, and 14 were now facing federal charges of their own because they had, when the FBI came to them, either lied in the proffer session or refused to cooperate or actively obstructed the investigation. That is the range. Wesley was one of the 11 who cooperated fully. That is not a small thing. That is the specific choice a young man made at my kitchen table on a Sunday evening in September, and the specific way that choice paid out over the following 8 months of investigation and the following trial and the following 10 weeks in the Eastern District Federal Courthouse in the city. Wesley walked into the FBI field office on the following Tuesday, the 10th of September, with Judith at his side. He sat for an 11-hour proffer session with Agent Roberts and 2 U.S. attorneys. He came out that evening with a formal cooperation agreement in his pocket. He continued to work at the insurance broker. His employer, whom Wesley had, on Judith's advice, told the whole shape of the case on the Monday morning after our kitchen table meeting, and who had, to my surprise, and my daughter's surprise, and my son-in-law's specific surprise, kept Wesley on staff with the caveat that Wesley would be working out of an internal-facing back-office role until the case was resolved, and with the further caveat that Wesley's boss at the firm, a man named Douglas Merrick, whom I had never met before, but who Susan tells me is now a specific piece of Wesley's ongoing life, sat in with Wesley for a 15-minute check-in every Monday morning to discuss how Wesley was doing. Douglas Merrick kept Wesley on staff at the insurance broker because, Susan told me later, Douglas Merrick had, 16 years earlier, had a son of his own who had gone down a similar shape of a road. And Douglas Merrick had decided, in the specific way a man makes a specific decision, that he was going to be, for Wesley the boss, he wished his own son had had. That is who Douglas Merrick is. I have shaken his hand exactly once, at Wesley's second Sunday supper in December, when Wesley brought Douglas over for coffee at 7:30. Douglas is 58 years old. Douglas's own son is 29, living in Portland, 6 years sober from opioids. That is a piece of the world that has to be said, because Douglas Merrick did not come out of nowhere. Douglas Merrick came out of his own son's 14-year descent and recovery, and Douglas Merrick recognized my grandson on the Monday morning after our kitchen table meeting, and Douglas Merrick kept my grandson employed. That is one specific piece of what has made Wesley's next 18 months possible. The federal trial of Marcus Bellamy, Wesley's college roommate, the mind behind Titan Capital Partners, the man Wesley had known for a decade and had believed for 2 years, began in the second week of March. Judith and I sat in the 4th row of the Eastern District Federal Courthouse in the city, for every day of trial that Wesley testified. Wesley testified on the third day of the fourth week. He took the stand at 10:04 a.m. on a Wednesday morning in April, in a dark suit his mother had bought him at a men's store the previous Saturday, with his hair cut 2 days earlier, with a pale blue tie Nell had picked out for him, with his hands steady at his sides. He was sworn in. He gave the whole shape of his story, from the fall of 2023 to the 25th of August of last year, to the U.S. attorney under direct examination for 4 hours. The court broke for lunch. Wesley came back to the stand at 1:30 p.m. He faced 2.5 hours of cross-examination from Marcus's defense attorney, a man Judith had told me before the trial was going to try to make Wesley look like a co-conspirator and shake his testimony. Wesley did not shake. Wesley answered every question in a plain, quiet voice, and did not lose his composure and did not lose his details. The defense attorney gave up at 4:09 p.m. Wesley stepped down at 4:11. He walked out of the courtroom past the fourth row and did not look at me directly, but he touched the small brass button on his suit jacket, which was, I learned later, the specific signal he and I had worked out at the 8th second Sunday supper for, "I made it through, Grandpa." I nodded. Wesley walked out. Judith held my hand for a moment on the bench. Marcus Bellamy was convicted 6 weeks later. Marcus Bellamy was sentenced in July to 12 years in a federal facility. Marcus Bellamy's assets were fully seized. The federal clawback fund began distributing to victims in the fall. My share came in on the 11th of October, a check for $34,972, or about 41 cents on the dollar of the $85,600 that had gone out of my savings. Wesley and I entered the recovery into the new brown cloth-bound ledger we had opened on the 3rd of October the previous year, in his own hand, at my kitchen table. On the 12th of October, when I called him over to log it, that is one line in the ledger. It is my favorite line. In the 8 months since, we have logged the beginning of the bi-weekly restitution deductions from Wesley's paychecks, coming in at $422 every 2 weeks, structured to pay off the remaining 59 cents on the dollar over 15 years. Wesley has not missed a payment. 19 deductions logged so far, 20 entries in the ledger. That is the shape. The second Sunday suppers have been running for 18 months. That is 18 suppers. Wesley has not missed one. 2 of them were on video from out of town, one from a work trip to Chicago in April, and one from Nell's graduation weekend in the city, when Wesley had driven out for the graduation and had, at 6 p.m. on that Sunday, called me from a hotel room, and we had eaten supper together on video. 16 of the 18 have been in person at my kitchen table. Wesley arrives at 5:45 p.m. He hangs his coat on the hook by the door. He sits down in the chair to my right. I pour him a cup of coffee. He opens his ledger, the small brown cloth-bound book I bought him at the stationery store on Elm Street on the 4th of September, matching the ones Connie had bought for me over the decades. And he shows me the current month's page. He talks me through it. I look. I do not question. I do not audit. I do not check the numbers against anything. He explains what he wants to explain. I listen. Then we eat supper. Then we talk about his life, and his job, and what Douglas Merrick said in his last Monday check-in, and what he has been reading. Wesley started reading, seriously, in the 3rd month after the case broke. He had not been a reader before that, and about Nell, and about his father, and about how his mother is doing at the hospital. And at 9 p.m., Wesley stands up. He hugs me. He puts his coat on. He drives home to his apartment. And on the way out, at every one of the 18 suppers, Wesley has, without fail, kissed his grandmother's chair. He kissed it that first Christmas afternoon at 7:28 p.m. after he had made the phone into a pipeline. He kissed it at every second Sunday supper for the 8 months of the theft. He has kissed it at every one of the 18 suppers of the repair. The specific shape of what has changed over the 18 months is that when Wesley kisses his grandmother's chair on the way out, he can now look at me while he is doing it. He could not in the 8 months of the theft. He could not for the first 3 months after Sunday evening in September either. Around month 4, at supper number 4, at 8:52 p.m. as he was standing up to leave, Wesley kissed his grandmother's chair, and then he turned his head and he looked at me, and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything, and we both understood that the specific piece of Wesley that had been in exile from Connie for 11 months had come back into her presence. It has been every second Sunday since. And Wesley has taught himself, over these 18 months to be a young man his grandmother would recognize. Nell knew about the case by the end of the Sunday evening kitchen meeting. Susan called her at 9:15 p.m. from my house. Nell drove up from her graduate school 2 hours south the next weekend and spent Saturday morning at my kitchen table with me and Wesley and Susan and Paul. Nell hugged her brother for probably 4 minutes when she walked in the door, and she said, "Quiet. Wesley, I love you. Whatever you have to do, we are going to be okay. I am going to be okay. Mom and Dad and Grandpa are going to be okay. And you are going to be okay." Wesley cried in his sister's arms. That was the second time I have seen my grandson cry in his life. The first was in the FBI office on the day of the 11-hour proffer. The second was in his sister's arms in my kitchen on the following Saturday. He has cried since at 3 of the 18 suppers, for reasons I am not going to describe here because they are between Wesley and me. But Nell was, from the Saturday after the Sunday, 100% in on the shape of what her brother was doing, and Nell has, in her own specific way, been the piece of the family that has held the whole shape steady. Nell has come up on the train every other weekend for 18 months. Nell has come to 5 of the 18 second Sunday suppers on the specific Sundays when her second Sunday visit and my second Sunday supper aligned, and she has sat quietly at the kitchen table with Wesley and me and drunk coffee and let us do the ledger conversation. Nell is going to be, when she is 35, one of the country's serious rare book conservators, and she is also going to be, at 40, the person who has held her family together for the 15 years of Wesley's restitution and beyond. Nell is my Connie at 22. Connie was Nell in 1966. The line runs clean between them across 70 years. I have said this out loud to Connie's chair at supper more than once. The Constance Ainsworth Fund. I set one up too, and I want to tell you about it because it is different from the shape of some elder fraud funds. The 59 cents on the dollar Wesley pays me every 2 weeks, plus the $34,972 from the federal clawback, plus a further $50,000 from my own savings, went into a small named fund I put together with Judith about 4 months into Wesley's restitution schedule. The fund does one specific thing. It provides paralegal support for cooperating witnesses in federal financial fraud cases who are between the ages of 20 and 35 and who are, in the specific shape Wesley was, both perpetrators and victims. Young men and women who were themselves recruited into schemes and then used family resources to try to save themselves, and who are now facing the specific hard passage of cooperating with federal investigators while their own families work out the shape of restitution and repair. The fund pays for the specific paralegal hours a young person needs to walk through a proffer agreement carefully, to prepare for testimony, to negotiate with an employer about continued employment, and to draft a restitution schedule that fits into a young person's actual budget. Judith has taken on the fund's work in her own practice at a specific reduced rate. Regina Alden, Judith's paralegal, whom I have known for years, and who is the specific right person for this work, runs the intake. The fund has, in 14 months, helped 9 young people through the specific hard passage Wesley walked through. Every one of them is now, per Judith's follow-up file, in some form of restitution to a family member and cooperation with a federal case. Not everyone has held. 2 of the 9 have already relapsed into further problems. But 7 of the 9 are holding. That is enough. It is the specific work the fund was set up to do. Let me tell you about one young woman, because a story about one is always truer than a story about a 9. Her name, I'm not going to say her real name, was Estelle. Estelle was 29 years old, a paralegal at a mid-sized firm in the city, and Estelle had been recruited into a smaller Ponzi scheme in the fall of last year by her boyfriend, and Estelle had, over the following 6 months, quietly moved $42,000 of her aging aunt's savings into the scheme through a debit card arrangement Estelle had set up during a helpful visit to her aunt's house that October. Estelle's scheme collapsed in the spring. Estelle came to the fund through a specific referral chain in April, and Judith met with her, and Judith walked her through the shape of what Wesley had done, and Estelle sat in Judith's office and cried for about 25 minutes. And then Estelle signed the paperwork to enter into her own proffer agreement with the FBI on the boyfriend's case, and Estelle testified in the fall, and Estelle is now 3 months into a 15-year restitution schedule with her aunt. Her aunt has forgiven her. Her aunt has, on Judith's suggestion, invited Estelle to come to her house for supper every second Sunday of the month for the next 15 years. Estelle goes. She goes every time. Estelle called me on the phone last month at Judith's suggestion. Judith had asked whether I would be willing to talk to a young person in the fund who needed to hear from an on-the-other-end grandfather figure that this was going to be all right. And Estelle and I talked for about 40 minutes on my kitchen phone on a Wednesday afternoon in October, and Estelle cried a little, and I told her the specific thing that I had, in the 18 months since Wesley's Sunday evening in September, come to understand. I told her, Estelle, the thing that saves you is that your aunt made you come to supper every second Sunday for 15 years. It is not going to feel like it is saving you some of the Sundays. Some of the Sundays it is going to feel like an obligation. Do not skip. Never skip. Never. Every second Sunday for 15 years. That is the stitch. Every stitch catches the one before it. If you never skip a stitch, the binding will hold at the end of 15 years, and you will be a person your aunt is proud of. And you will be a person you are proud of. Do not skip. Are you hearing me, Estelle? Estelle said, Yes, Mr. Ainsworth, I am hearing you. She has not skipped since. Her aunt sent me a thank you card in November. I keep it in a drawer in the kitchen next to Connie's little blue address book. It is a piece of what the fun does. Let me tell you about a Sunday in the summer, just past, because it is the answer to the Tuesday afternoon at Warren's desk when I understood the whole shape of what my grandson had done. It was a supper at my house on the second Sunday in July. Wesley was there. Wesley, at 28 and a half now, 16 months into the cooperation and the note and the ledger, in his back office role at the insurance broker under Douglas Merrick's Monday check-ins. Susan and Paul were there. Nell was there. She had come up on the Saturday train and was going to stay through Sunday. Judith was there, at my invitation. Warren Ellis was there with his wife Rebecca. Ann Connie's chair at the far end of the kitchen table was empty, as it has been at every supper for 8 years. As it will be for as long as I am alive to set the table. I stood up at some point during that supper, and I raised my glass, and I said, Thank you all for being here tonight. This is a Sunday supper at Constance Ainsworth's kitchen table. In this house, we set an empty chair for Connie, and we do not sit in it. And every one of us at this table has a reason to be grateful for what she did with her life, and what she did with her ledger in 1985, and what she did with her banker choice in 2003. And what she did with her cousin-at-law in her last week, and what she taught each of us, even the ones of us who came into her life after she had left it. To Connie. Every glass went up. Wesley was quiet. Wesley said, Quiet. To Grandma, thank you for still being here. I am sorry again that I forgot to look for you for a year. I look for you now. I see you now. I'm sorry. Susan cried a little bit. Nell put her arm around her brother. Judith said, Quiet. To Connie, best friend I had in this world, best cousin, best sense of what a family is. To Connie. Warren Ellis said, To Connie, she picked me in 2003, and I have tried to earn it every day of the 22 years since. Paul said, To Connie. Rebecca, Warren's wife, who is a retired librarian and who had been a friend of Connie's in the last decade of her life, said, To Connie. I sat down. We ate. I have looked at that empty chair a lot of nights over these 18 months, and I have thought a great deal about forgiveness and trust, because what Wesley did to me made me think about it in a way that is a little different from how I had thought about it before. Forgiveness and trust are not the same thing. Everybody who has been through something like what I have been through will tell you they are not. But I want to add, from this particular story, a piece I did not know before. Forgiveness and trust do not always have to be years apart. Sometimes they can travel together, one small stitch at a time, in the specific shape of an arrangement. 16 months of second Sunday suppers, a promissory note with automatic bi-weekly deductions, a ledger a young man keeps in his own hand, a fund that helps other young people walk the specific hard passage. Sometimes trust does not get rebuilt by waiting to see if the person changes and then giving trust back. Sometimes it gets rebuilt by giving the person a specific small stitch of trust every 14 days and watching what he does with it and giving the next small stitch 14 days later, only if the previous one caught. That is what Wesley and I have been doing for 18 months. It is not a formula. It is a bookbinder's discipline applied to a grandson. You catch the previous stitch, you bring the next one up, you watch it hold, you do the next one. 18 months in, Wesley has caught 78 consecutive stitches in a row. That is not a whole binding, but it is a piece of one. And what I want to tell you, if there is somebody in your life who did something like what Wesley did to me, is that the choice between forgive but never trust again and cast out entirely is a false choice, and that a third path is available, and the third path is one small catching stitch at a time, and the binding holds if the person on the other end of it is willing to do the work. Wesley has been willing. That is not universal. Estelle has been willing. Also not universal. And I am telling you, I think a lot about fathers and children and grandfathers and grandsons, sitting at that table looking at that empty chair. I have not, in the 18 months since, been able to look at Wesley without thinking about Connie. Wesley loved his grandmother more than he loved anybody else on this earth, including his own parents. That is not a criticism of Susan and Paul. It is a fact about the specific shape of Wesley's first grandchild love for his grandmother, which was the specific fullest love the boy had until his grandmother died on the 16th of July of 2016. And when Connie died, a piece of Wesley, the piece Connie had been trying to teach the 30% to, went into an 8-year drift, and I did not, being a grieving widower, notice the drift closely enough to intervene. The drift became the roommate at college. The roommate became the phone call in October of 2023. The phone call became the $18,000 of Wesley's savings. The $18,000 became the $85,006 of mine. That is the whole line. And the whole line was possible because Wesley had lost his grandmother at 19 years old and had never entirely dealt with the loss, and had, for the 8 years since, been slowly becoming a young man his grandmother did not recognize. Connie was the specific piece of infrastructure he needed. Connie was gone. I was there, but I was not paying attention closely enough. And so, the drift proceeded, and the 18,000 became the 85,006. And what has happened over the 18 months of the repair is that Wesley has been slowly becoming, at my kitchen table, a young man his grandmother would recognize again. And I have been slowly becoming, at the same kitchen table, the grandfather I should have been. For the 8 years I was too much of a grieving widower to be. Both of us have been coming back into a shape Connie would have known. That is the specific piece of forgiveness that no one told me about ahead of time. Forgiveness turned out in this story to be a specific piece of us coming home to a woman who was not here. And she was here. She was in every square inch of that Sunday supper in July. There is a piece I want to say about Nell before I move to the reflection. Because Nell has been the specific young person in this family who has held the whole thing together. And I do not want you to hear the story of my grandson without also hearing the story of my granddaughter. Nell finished her first year of the graduate program in May. She is halfway through her master's. She has, in the 18 months of the case, been my second most frequent visitor at this house, after Wesley. Every other Saturday on the train, an entire Saturday afternoon at the basement bench, then Sunday supper if the timing lined up. Nell has learned in these 18 months more of the trade than I taught Wesley in the 28 years I had before him, because Nell is on the bench and Wesley was not. That is nobody's fault. It is where the family sits. Nell has learned to sew signatures with kettle stitches. She has learned to attach boards through cords. She has learned to trim a forage with a plow. She has learned to gild a spine title with real gold leaf, which is the hardest specific skill in the trade, and which most working bookbinders never learn because it requires a very specific patience. Nell has the patience. Nell learned it in 3 weekends. Nell is going to be, when she is 30, better than I am. She is going to be, when she is 40, one of about 6 serious rare book conservators in this country. That is not exaggeration. That is what I see on my bench. And Nell knows, and has known since her grandmother's death, that the small leather roll of tools Franz Deutsch brought from Frankfurt in 1949 is coming to her. And what Nell does not know, what I have decided in the last 2 months and have not yet told her, is that my Connie's ledgers, all 3 of them, from 1985 to the current one, are also going to come to her when I go. Not to Wesley. Wesley has his own ledger, which he has been keeping in his own hand for 18 months, and Wesley's ledger will remain his. Connie's ledgers, though, the 3 brown cloth-bound books my Connie bought at the stationery store on Elm Street across 4 decades, are going to Nell, Because Nell is the one who is going to keep them going. Nell is going to keep her own ledger from the day I give them to her, in the same discipline her grandmother started on the third of every month in ink. Nell is going to be the specific piece of my Connie that walks forward into the next 50 years. Nell will know when I hand them to her. She will understand. She is my Connie. The line runs clean. So, let me tell you what all of this taught me. From the bench of an old bookbinder who thought he had learned everything a man needed to know standing in front of a book press for 55 years, and who found himself, at 76, back at school with a Tuesday afternoon reconciliation and a checkbox in a settings menu on a phone for teachers. I learned that paper remembers what electrons forget. My Connie bought me a small brown cloth-bound ledger in March of 1985 and made me promise to reconcile my monthly statement against it in ink on the third of every month for the rest of my life. 39 years and change. I have kept the promise. In every one of those 39 years, until last September, I had never encountered anything on the paper that did not match the electrons. Not once, not one line. The bank had always been right. The paper had always been right. The two had always agreed. And I had, for those 39 years, wondered occasionally, in a small private way, whether Connie's ledger was a piece of over-caution, whether I was doing an old woman's work on a modern world that did not any longer need to be watched that closely. I had never said it out loud because I loved Connie, but I had thought it. I had thought it as recently as last summer, when I had done my July reconciliation on the 3rd of August, and had, in the specific way an old man thinks small idle thoughts on a hot afternoon, wondered whether at some point I could just stop doing the ledger and trust the electrons the way everybody else in the world seemed to. I did not stop. I kept doing it. On the 3rd of September, I did the August reconciliation. On the 3rd of September, the ledger caught the 12th transfer, and every one of the 39 years of the ledger paid off, in one specific Tuesday afternoon at 3:40 p.m., in a way that my Connie had known, in 1985, would eventually happen. Connie did not know when. Connie did not know how. Connie did not know the specific mechanism would be a Ponzi scheme run by her first grandchild's college roommate, executed via a checkbox on a phone Wesley set up on Christmas afternoon. Connie did not need to know. Connie understood the principle. The principle is that paper remembers what electrons forget. The principle is that a handwritten line in ink, cross-referenced by a specific person on a specific day of every month, is a piece of infrastructure so old-fashioned that no fraud scheme designed by a smart young man in 2024 is going to think to defeat it. It is beneath the notice of the fraud. It is under the fraud's radar. Because the fraud is designed to defeat electronic monitoring, and the fraud is designed to defeat modern account alerts, and the fraud is designed to defeat SMS notifications. But the fraud is not designed to defeat a 76-year-old bookbinder sitting at his kitchen table with a fountain pen and a printed paper statement on the 3rd of every month, in ink. That is the piece of the fraud landscape that the fraudsters have not adapted to yet, because there are not enough of us doing it for the fraudsters to notice. Which means, right now, in 2025, if you are old, and if you have an aging brain, and if you are worried about the specific kind of tech abuse fraud my grandson perpetrated on me, the specific piece of protection that no fraudster has yet built a defense against is a hand-kept ledger in ink, reconciled on a specific day of every month, against the paper statement your bank still mails to you. It is the specific piece of my Connie's foresight I want to hand you tonight, if I can give you nothing else. Trust the paper, do the ledger, on the 3rd of every month, in ink. It is the piece that saved my savings. It is what my Connie did in 1985. It is going to be, if you start it tonight, the piece that saves yours. I learned that a young person who does a terrible thing is not necessarily a bad person. He is often a person who has done a terrible thing inside of a system that was pointed at him by an older person who was much worse. My grandson stole $85,600 from me. That is a terrible thing. That was Wesley's crime. And Wesley has owned it, at my kitchen table, and at the FBI office, and on the witness stand in the Eastern District Federal Courthouse in April. And Wesley is going to spend the next 15 years paying it back in bi-weekly increments from his paychecks. And Wesley is going to spend the next 15 years coming to supper at my house on the 2nd Sunday of every month. That is the shape. But Wesley did the terrible thing inside of a system Marcus Bellamy had pointed at him. And Marcus Bellamy is now serving 12 years in a federal facility because Marcus was the real criminal and Wesley was one of the outer ring investors Marcus had used as instruments of the scheme. Which does not excuse Wesley, it contextualizes Wesley. And what I want to say to you, if you have a young person in your life who has done a terrible thing recently, before you decide what to do about the terrible thing, ask yourself whether the young person did it alone or whether the young person was pointed at the terrible thing by an older, smoother person. Because those are two different situations, and they call for two different responses. And if you treat the second situation as though it were the first, you are going to be too hard on the young person, and you are going to miss the specific opportunity to work with the young person against the older person. That is what we did with Wesley. He testified against Marcus. He was our tool against the real criminal. And in the exact proportion to Wesley's cooperation, Wesley has been given, by the federal system and by his grandfather, the specific chance to become a young man his grandmother would recognize again. Not every young person deserves that chance. But most of the young people I have met, through the fund, through Judith, through the specific arc of Wesley's own case, most of them turn out to have been pointed by somebody. Find the somebody, prosecute the somebody. Use the young person's cooperation to do it. That is the specific piece of institutional judgment I have come to hold. I learned that patience is not weakness, and that 18 months of second Sunday suppers is not letting somebody off the hook. Because there is a specific piece of patience that gets tested in the shape of a case like this, that does not get tested in the shape of a case where you cut the person out. This is a patience that has to hold across a federal proffer session and a 10-week trial and a 15-year restitution schedule and 18 months of second Sunday suppers already logged and 162 second Sundays still to come. It has to hold when Wesley has a bad week and calls his mother in tears at 11 at night. It has to hold when the 23rd supper is on a Sunday in December, when I'm not feeling well and would rather not have anybody at the kitchen table, and Wesley shows up anyway because we do not skip. It has to hold when Wesley makes a mistake at work and Douglas Merrick has to sit with him in the Monday check-in longer than usual. It has to hold across sleep and hard weeks, and the ordinary drift of being a young man in his late 20s, trying to become the person his grandmother saw at 17 minutes old. Patience is not a mood. Patience is a discipline. It is the specific discipline of an old bookbinder catching one stitch at a time in a kettle stitch signature that is going to hold the whole binding across a century. Every stitch catches the previous one. Every second Sunday supper catches the previous one. Every bi-weekly restitution payment catches the previous one. Every Monday check-in with Douglas Merrick catches the previous one. Every entry in Wesley's own ledger catches the previous one. Every kiss Wesley gives Connie's chair on the way out of my kitchen catches the previous one. That is the whole binding. It is not spectacular. It is not fast. It is not, in any single moment, the piece anybody would take a picture of. It is a slow, careful 16-month accumulation of small caught stitches that has already become a piece of a binding that is going to hold, if we keep at it, for the rest of Wesley's life. Do not underestimate the specific discipline of it. Do not think a 15-year commitment is a soft one. It is the hardest specific commitment a grandfather can make, and it is the specific one that most rebuilds a young man's binding, and it works. And I learned that you reap what you sow, but sometimes what you reap is bigger than what you sowed, because somebody 8 years dead was doing the sowing behind you the whole time. My Connie sowed a ledger in 1985. My Connie sowed a specific banker in 2003. My Connie sowed a specific lawyer in 1991, when Connie's cousin Judith went into practice. My Connie sowed a specific granddaughter over Sunday afternoons at the basement workbench across a decade. My Connie sowed the specific piece of Wesley's soul that was going to, at grandmother's kitchen table on a Sunday evening in September, hear the offer and take it. Because that piece of Wesley was Connie's piece of Wesley, laid down at 17 minutes of his life and reinforced at every Sunday supper of his childhood, and Connie's piece was the piece that held when the rest of Wesley's binding failed. Connie was gone. Connie had been gone 8 years. Connie was in every square inch of what happened. That is what I reaped from the 3rd of September of last year through today. I reaped a grandson, Wesley Paul Whitcomb, 28 and a half years old, 16 months into cooperation with the federal government, 16 months into a 15-year restitution schedule to his grandfather, 16 months into second Sunday suppers, 16 months into a small brown cloth-bound ledger he keeps in his own hand, holding his own binding open one stitch at a time. That is what I reaped, what my Connie sowed. She did the sowing over 48 years. She did not know what specific harvest was coming. She trusted the paper. And on the 3rd of September of last year, at 3:40 p.m., her paper caught the 12th transfer, and the whole binding was saved. The block held to the boards. The mold did not fail. The kettle stitches at the head and the tail did not come loose. And the book on the bench in front of me, the book of my grandson's life, is now on my kitchen table on the second Sunday of every month, being opened and read one page at a time, with a young man sitting in the chair to my right in his shirt sleeves, telling me what his month has been. The spine held. It held because my Connie, in 1985, at our kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, made me promise to keep a ledger. That is the whole story of the fortress. It is not a big fortress. It is a small brown cloth-bound book. It is my Connie's book. And the book held. Connie, you were right, about all of it, about Warren and about the ledger, and about Marcus Bellamy at Thanksgiving in 2017, and about Wesley at 17 minutes of his life, and about Nell at 4 years old at the basement bench, and about Judith at your bedside 4 days before you died. You always could see the whole shape of every stitch before it was set, and you sewed the specific stitches you needed to sew in the specific decades you needed to sew them in, and 8 years and 49 days after your death, the whole binding held, because of what you had set into it. So, well done, my love, well done. I will see you when it is time. Keep the far chair ready. I am still teaching Nell on Sundays, and hosting Wesley on second Sundays, and reconciling the ledger on the third, and running the fund with Judith and Regina. And then I will come. Trust the paper. I have, every third of the month, in ink. Since March of 1985, the spine held, because you set the stitch, because every stitch caught the one before it. Because you were right, Connie. You were right about all of it. The way you were always right about all of it. I love you. Save me a chair. If you have come this far with me, and if there is a young person in your life who has done a terrible thing recently, or if you were the young person, or if you are the older person who is trying to figure out what to do about it, take one thing out of all of it tonight. There are two kinds of silence in a family, and only one of them is the one you should be worried about. There is the silence of people who have said everything they need to say, and there is the silence of people who cannot figure out how to say what they need to say and have gone quiet because they cannot. If you are 76 and your grandson has been quieter than usual for the last 8 months, and has kissed the empty chair on his way out of your kitchen with an expression that does not entirely add up, then you are inside the second silence, and it is going to cost you unless you break it. Break it. Ask the question. Ask it plain. Ask it kindly. Ask it before the ledger catches the 12th transfer. Because a family that hears the beat 5 years early does not need Special Agent Roberts and a proffer session and a 10-week federal trial to save itself. It needs a Sunday supper with the phones put down and one honest question. Ask the question. Please. And if you have already missed it, if the ledger has already caught the 12th transfer, remember that the choice between casting the young person out and pretending it did not happen is a false choice, and that the third path is there, and it takes years. And it works. It worked for us. It has worked for Wesley, 16 months in. It can work for you. But you have to be willing to sit at the same kitchen table on the same second Sunday of the month for 180 months in a row and listen. That is the whole work. That is the whole trade. Set the stitch, catch the previous stitch, bring the next one up, watch it hold, do the next one. Thank you for staying to the end. If any of this rang true, then do the small, unglamorous things that actually hold. Buy a hand-kept ledger. Meet your banker. Read every setting on your phone once a year in daylight with your reading glasses on. Ask the young people in your life questions they cannot answer in a sentence. Sit an hour with the ones who are drifting. Say their names out loud when you pray, if you pray, or when you think, if you do not. Do not ever hand your phone to a young person for 3 hours and not ask later exactly what he changed. And if you were the young person, if you are the Wesley in your family, call your grandfather this week. Just call. You do not have to say anything hard. Say hello. Let him hear your voice. Let him hear it before the settings menu of a phone gets involved. That is the whole prevention. That is the whole cure. A grandfather who has heard his grandson's voice this month has not lost his grandson yet. Give him that. Give him that this week. My grandson set up my new phone on Christmas afternoon of last year. He spent 3 hours doing it. He forwarded every incoming text message on my account to his own phone, and he suppressed my notifications, and he ran $85,600 out of my savings over 8 months in a Ponzi scheme run by his college roommate. On the 3rd of September at 3:40 p.m., I sat at my kitchen table with a hand-kept ledger my wife had bought in 1985, and I reconciled August's statement against the ledger in ink, and the ledger caught the 12th transfer. Everything else in this story is what happened between that Tuesday afternoon and now. My grandson is 16 months into a 15-year restitution schedule to me. He is at his job under a boss who saw his own son at Wesley's age. He is at his second Sunday suppers with me, 16 kept, none skipped. He is at his own ledger, entered in his own hand, on the 3rd of every month, in ink. He is a young man his grandmother would recognize, and is becoming, one caught stitch at a time, a young man his grandmother would be proud of. The spine held. It held because my Connie, at our kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, in March of 1985, bought a small brown cloth-bound book at a stationery store on Elm Street, and put it in my hand, and told me to keep it in ink on the 3rd of every month, forever. I have. Every 3rd, in ink. And when I go, my Connie's 3 ledgers are going to my granddaughter Nell, who is going to keep them going in the same discipline her grandmother set, on the 3rd of every month in ink, into the second half of this century. That is a piece of infrastructure my Connie set up in 1985, and it is going to run through the end of Nell's life in about 2040. 55 years of a small brown cloth-bound book kept in ink by 3 generations of one family on the 3rd of every month. That is what my Connie sewed. That is what a wife's discipline scales to, when the wife is the specific kind of quiet, careful woman my Connie was. The spine holds. That is what a spine does when it has been set correctly by a bookbinder's wife who understood, at our kitchen table in 1985, exactly what she was doing. The 3rd of September, kitchen table, coffee, ledger. August's paper statement laid flat in front of me, my pen moving down the second column, then stopping. $2,800 transferred to TCP Holdings on the 7th. My pen not moving. My eyes reading the line 4 times. My understanding not there yet. Warren Ellis at the credit union, 3:42 p.m., in a voice I had heard him use exactly once before. Leo, come down, come now. A drive of 6 blocks with the ledger under my arm on the passenger seat. Warren at his desk, Marta from operations. A folder that had been open since 8:30 a.m., 12 transfers, $85,600. SMS forwarding to my grandson's number since Christmas. A federal case in the Eastern District. A U.S. Attorney's Office. A special agent named Diane Roberts. A lawyer named Judith Kowalski, who was my Connie's first cousin, and who had been ready for 8 years. A drive home through a town of maples starting to turn. A daughter I called at 8:31 p.m. 5 days of bookbinding in the basement to become the specific version of myself for Sunday evening. Wesley at 5:58 coming up the front walk, his face going through 3 specific things: surprise, calculation, relief. His hands flat on the table, his voice saying, before anybody had spoken, "Grandpa, I did it. I did all of it. I want to tell you everything." Agent Roberts on speakerphone, Judith to my left, ledger to my right. Connie's chair empty at the far end, 5 terms, Wesley signing, 11-hour proffer on the 10th of September. Douglas Merritt keeping Wesley on staff at the insurance broker. 10-week federal trial in the spring. Wesley on the witness stand in a suit his mother had bought him, in a pale blue tie Nell had picked out, testifying for 6.5 hours under oath, and not shaking. Marcus Bellamy convicted 6 weeks later. 12 years in a federal facility. Clawback of 41 cents, 16 second Sunday suppers so far. 16 kept, none skipped. Wesley's own ledger in his own hand, 15 years to go, 164 suppers ahead. The restitution schedule ticking down. The Constance Ainsworth Fund working with young cooperating witnesses through Judith's office. A young woman named Estelle calling me on the phone in October and me telling her, do not skip. Ever. And on the second Sunday in July of this year, my grandson kissed his grandmother's chair on the way out of my kitchen. The way he has kissed it on every visit for 8 years. The way he had kissed it through the whole shape of the theft. The way he has kissed it through the whole shape of the repair. He turned his head. He looked at me, and I looked at him. And we both understood the specific stitch had caught. Trust the paper. My Connie's voice from a kitchen table in March of 1985, in ink on the 3rd of every month for 40 years. The ledger my grandson keeps now in his own hand. The one my granddaughter will keep after me for another 50. Franz Deutsch's bone folder above the bench, worn smooth on the fold side, and the small brown cloth-bound book that caught the 12th transfer at 3:40 p.m. on a Tuesday in September. The spine held, because my Connie set the stitch, and every stitch in the end caught the one before it, not lost.